Chapter 159 Worn Out. Chapter 159 Worn Out. She was methodical in how she used these punching bags. Thud. Flaming sword stabbed into an obsidian wolf's head right between its eyes. Thud. Thud. Feng Wu struck each wolf in exactly the same spot. There weren't any complicated moves or excessive tricks, but just a single fatal strike. It was as precise as it was lethal. As a result, it only took her half the time she had used to kill the previous 10 wolves to kill these 20. However, Feng Wu wasn't happy with her speed and frowned. The obsidian wolves had tempers as well. Would they just sit there calmly while their fellow wolves got slaughtered? Of course not. Hence, more obsidian wolves stepped into the breach as the others fell. There was only enough room for 20 wolves around Feng Wu, but that didn't turn out to be a problem. As soon as a wolf was killed, a new one filled the gap. Hence, there were always 20 wolves around Feng Wu. They were full of vigor and had a prevailing thirst for blood. On the other hand, Feng Wu was gradually becoming worn out. After killing 500 wolves in a row, Feng Wu finally realized that she was burning out. She remained as excited as she had been in the beginning, but she was physically exhausted. The obsidian wolves were only too sensitive to the change in her physical state. They immediately sensed it when Feng Wu slowed down by the tiniest amount. Their cold gazes were fixed on Feng Wu, as if they were looking at a dead person. Feng Wu snickered. She was only 20 meters away from the safe circle. What did she have to worry about? Fourth stance of flaming sword. Dashing stars. Pop, pop, pop. Feng Wu struck out with her sword in a tapping motion, as if she was dabbing a piece of rice paper with a paintbrush that had been dipped in ink. With each tap from the tip of the sword, blood sprayed from the foreheads of 3 wolves in turn and they flew backward instantly. Seizing the opportunity, Feng Wu dashed the other way. To Feng Wu now, 20 meters was too short a distance that she could cover in one breath. Before the obsidian wolves could react, Feng Wu was back in the safe circle. The beautiful lady rushed up to Feng Wu's side and wouldn't let go of her hands. Tears rolled down the lady's cheeks. It seemed that she was greatly shaken. Feng Wu stroked her mother's back, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "Mum, I'm fine. I'm not hurt. That's all wolf blood, not mine." Only then did the beautiful lady notice the blood on Feng Wu. She gasped all of a sudden, closed her eyes and collapsed. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She had been wondering when that would happen. Her mother would usually faint at the sight of blood, and she had only been able to stand it now because she was too nervous to pass out. Feng Wu handed her mother back to Qiuling in resignation. "She's way too tense. It'll do her good to get some rest like this. Take care of her and make sure to keep her warm." Qiuling nodded repeatedly. Knowing that they were on a tight schedule, Feng Wu sat down and crossed her legs after leaving some instructions. She immersed herself in her cultivation right away. After the battle, Feng Wu could distinctly sense the fire spiritual energy pouring into her dantian and colliding violently with the rippling water there. Whoosh! The speed at which the golden liquid was produced more than doubled. The first 3 levels were rather easy, and it wasn't a surprise that she could level up very fast then. However, starting from level 4, she was obviously slowing down. Otherwise, Fairy Muyao and Feng Lu wouldn't have remained as they were at level 5 and level 6. With her eyes shut, Feng Wu focused on liquefying the golden liquid 1 drop at a time. After running her spiritual essence through her body, Feng Wu felt her fatigue disappear as she once again returned to her strongest state. Chapter 160 I've rested for too long. Chapter 160. I've rested for too long. A faint smile emerged on Feng Wu's face. Right after that, she charged into the wolf pack again, still holding her flaming sword. Another fierce battle began. This time, Feng Wu was able to fight for longer than before. She only got worn out and retreated into the circle after killing as many as 700 wolves. She then closed her eyes and cultivated, liquefying all the fire spiritual energy into the golden liquid before charging out again. She repeated this process over and over again, returning to the circle when she was exhausted and going back into battle after she recovered. Wounds gradually covered Feng Wu's body. There wasn't a part of her that wasn't bleeding. The marks the claws left on her flesh were a ghastly sight. But Feng Wu couldn't care less about her wounds. The only thing she cared about now was getting stronger. In this world that honored martial prowess more than anything else, one would never be safe without adequate capabilities, especially someone like her who had once been deemed a genius. So many people in the imperial capital had to be waiting to laugh at her, humiliate her, and pick on her. Now that she could cultivate again, all the hardship was nothing in comparison. As long as she was alive, she would keep on with the task. In the end, Qiuling was so worried that she almost fainted. Holding Feng Wu's hand, she said, "Miss, please at least take a break. What you're doing now is we worry about you so much." Feng Wu only smiled. "Qiuling, your miss has rested for too long." She had been held up for as long as 5 years in northern border city. But, seeing that the original color of Feng Wu's dress was no longer recognizable with all the bloodstains, Qiuling burst into tears. "Miss, you still have a long way ahead of you and you'll have a lifetime to cultivate."
"No."
Feng Wu shook her head, the look on her face solemn as she stared into Qiuling's eyes. "I'm not alone. I have my mother, my brother, and you lot to protect. If I'm not strong enough, we'll all die." What Feng Wu didn't tell Qiuling was that if Zhuo Qingyuan learned that she had gotten her ability back, what would stop her from destroying Feng Wu's phoenix blood again? At that thought, Feng Wu took a deep breath. She was still too slow. She had to work harder. Qiuling watched as her mistress threw herself into the pack of wolves in her blood-stained clothes. Covering her mouth with her hand, Qiuling cried in silence. She then took a deep breath. She couldn't help her mistress in her cultivation, but she could take care of Feng Wu's daily life and make sure that Feng Wu wasn't distracted from her important work. Yes, Qiuling made up her mind. After Feng Wu's repeated courageous attempts at challenging the Wolf King, her sword art had advanced to the 10th stance of Flaming Sword, piercing stars. With each cycle of recovery and cultivation, the golden liquid accumulated in her dantian until she finally reached level 5. Fairy Muyao and Feng Lu were still at level 5 and level 6 after all these years of cultivation, which was proof enough of how difficult it was to reach this level. However, Feng Wu had only resumed her cultivation 10 days ago, and she was already at level 5. But Feng Wu wasn't complacent about this achievement. If anything, she was filled with awe and reverence. For she knew better than anyone else about the student classification at Imperial College. All enrolled students were assigned to junior, intermediate, or advanced schools. One would only be admitted to the junior school when they became a level 3 spiritual master, and would graduate when they reached level 6. The intermediate school was open to those who had reached level 5, and the students graduated at level 9. Only those who had reached the spiritual grandmaster stage could apply to the advanced school. That was to say, Feng Wu was still a primary school student by that standard. It was too early for her to be complacent. At that thought, Feng Wu went back to fighting the wolves. Chapter 161 Love at First Sight. Chapter 161 Love at First Sight. By now, at the sight of the dead bodies scattered all over the ground, the obsidian wolves were looking at Feng Wu differently. This human girl wasn't all that frightening ability-wise, but her staunch and unyielding disposition and her tenacity that wouldn't waver in the face of any hardship intimidated the wolves. She had cuts, scratches, and bruises all over her body and had spat out blood more than once. However, she kept coming back after some rest. She was harder to kill than a roach. Hence, even beasts as ferocious as these obsidian wolves were shaken by Feng Wu's unconventional cultivation method. They were already thinking about retreating. Attitude was a very important factor in a stalemate. The side that was thinking about backing out first wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Feng Wu, on the other hand, didn't feel like she had had enough practice yet and didn't want them to leave. She was considering faking an injury to help the wolves rebuild their confidence. And that was exactly what she did. Right when she rolled on the ground in a fluster, the voice of a teenager rang out at that moment. "How dare you obsidian wolves take advantage of humans? Young lady, don't worry. Let me help you." An exceedingly handsome teenager jumped down and joined the fight. With a swipe of his sword, more wolves were flung out of the circle. Feng Wu's heart sank. Damn it. She was right to be disappointed. Seeing that another capable human being had joined in, the wolves promptly turned around and fled at top speed. The teenager looked astonished. "Hey, stop right there. You're going to leave like that after what you did. However, after their miserable experience with Feng Wu, the last thing the wolves would do was hang around. They scattered like scared birds. The teenager's mouth fell open as he watched the wolves flee. Rubbing his chin, he murmured, "They were so afraid of me. Am I that formidable already? Ha ha ha. I knew I was a genius." Feng Wu darted a look at the teenager and sighed inwardly. What a pity. She was going to use this rare opportunity to raise herself to level 6, for she had already achieved perfection in level 5 and the golden liquid had filled her dantian again. All she needed now was a fierce battle. Such a pity. However, the teenager knew nothing about Feng Wu's plan. Patting Feng Wu on the shoulder with his big hand, he said, "Young lady, don't worry. I'm here to protect you." Feng Wu gave him an awkward smile. Only then did the comely teenager see Feng Wu's face clearly. One look at her and his eyes opened wide. He was shaken to the core. The girl was stunning. All the blood did nothing to lessen her beauty. Her eyebrows were the color of the distant mountains, the look in her eyes as mild as moonlight, the shape of her nose smoother as the finest white jade, and her lips as fresh as cherry blossoms in April. Her features looked like they had been sculpted by the finest artist, and she was perfection itself. Just by standing there, she outshone all the landscape surrounding her, as if she was the only thing that existed between heaven and earth. Her beauty could take one's breath away. Ning Chenxi was the son of the governor of Linyuan province, and his mother was from northern Feng mansion. Hence, it was safe to say that he had seen more than enough of the world. He had met many daughters of noble families from the imperial capital, but none were comparable to the beautiful girl here. She was so stunning that he fell in love with her at first sight. "You." After a pause, Ning Chenxi frowned and scolded Feng Wu. "Young lady, where are the adults of your family? How could they leave you here in such danger? You'd be dead by now if I hadn't arrived in time." Chapter 162. Do you have a death wish? Chapter 162. Do you have a death wish? Feng Wu was rendered speechless by the good-looking teenager, who was so obviously someone from a respected family. Ning Chenxi, on the other hand, took Feng Wu's baffled look for worship and beamed at her. "I see that I'm so awe-inspiring, ha ha ha." Feng Wu wouldn't dignify those words with a reply. She promptly turned around and walked toward the safe circle. Obsidian wolves were merciless animals, and they had devoured all their companions that had been killed by Feng Wu, until all that was left were gruesome-looking bones. As a result, the battlefield looked rather terrifying. Feng Wu seemed to realize something all of a sudden, and she turned to the breezy teenager. "And you are?" "I'm Ning Chenxi. Little sister, don't tell me that you've never heard of me before?" Seeing that Feng Wu didn't react to his name at all, the teenager cried out in surprise. The sight of Ning Chenxi reminded Feng Wu of Feng Xuan, which immediately annoyed her. Hence, she snapped at the teenager, "Stop right there and don't move." Huh. Despite the baffling command, the teenager did as told. Feng Wu ran out of sight, faster than a flash. It had just occurred to Feng Wu that in order to escape from the wolves, Uncle Cho had had to leave the second carriage behind earlier, and all her beautiful mother's favorite clothes were in there. Feng Wu got to the carriage only to find it turned over. The horses had been eaten up by the wolves, but the chests were still there. Luckily, Feng Wu had her dragon and phoenix spiritual ring. As she pressed her hand to each chest in turn, she moved all of them inside the ring and stored them in the furthest corner. Since the beautiful lady would wake up soon, Feng Wu didn't want her mother to see her covered in blood, for it would definitely bring her to tears again. At that thought, Feng Wu jumped into a creek nearby and quickly cleaned herself up. She then changed into some new clothes and walked out of the woods, all fresh and tidy. Feng Wu had been gone for a while, which made Ning Chenxi worry. He went to search for Feng Wu in a hurry, and the first thing he saw was Feng Wu all freshened up. She was stunning even when covered in blood. Now that she had washed herself clean, there was something very pure and graceful about her, especially those eyes, which were limpid, brooding, and mesmerizing. Ning Chenxi suddenly had difficulty breathing. The moment his eyes landed on Feng Wu, Ning Chenxi felt all the blood rush to his head and his sensitive earlobes began to burn. Ahem. Ning Chenxi cleared his throat and stared at Feng Wu, feigning a grave look on his face. Young lady, do you have any idea how dangerous it is for you to run around like this? What if there were more obsidian wolves around? Do you have a death wish? Feng Wu rolled her eyes. If the teenager hadn't interrupted her, she would have been a level 6 spiritual master by now. Taking a deep breath, Feng Wu turned to leave, in case she lost her temper and lashed out at him. Ning Chenxi had no idea what he had done. Walking side by side with Feng Wu, he said, "Young lady, be reasonable. It's a dangerous world out here. Shall I escort you back home? By the way, which family do you belong to?" After he figured that out, he could ask his mother to propose a marriage with the girl's family later, ha ha ha. Such was what Ning Chenxi had in mind. Feng Wu took a deep breath and stared at Ning Chenxi. "Stop following me. If I do, what if those wolves come back?" Chapter 163. Do you know what a minister of the Grand Council is? Chapter 163. Do you know what a minister of the Grand Council is? Feng Wu stopped talking and picked up speed, and Ning Chenxi sped up as well. "Why, little sister, that's not bad at all. I see you're a level 5 spiritual master already." Ning Chenxi praised her, but Feng Wu said nothing in reply. When they reached the safe circle, Feng Wu saw that Choling had everything packed and ready for departure. Feng Wu said, "You guys go inside. I'll drive the carriage." Choling wouldn't have it. "But miss." Feng Wu shook her head. "We must leave here ASAP." Choling nodded. She then carried the beautiful lady while Granny Zhao helped Uncle Cho into the carriage. No sooner had Feng Wu raised her whip when that teenager sat down next to her in a familiar manner and reached out his hand. "Young lady, such manual labor defile your beauty. Let me help you." Feng Wu couldn't help but dart a look at him. "Who on earth are you?" Ning Chenxi's eyes widened. "You've never heard of me before? I can't believe it. I'm the Ning Chenxi. My dad is the governor of Linyuan province. So rest assured, everyone will make way for you here in Linyuan when I'm around." Ha ha ha. The governor of Linyuan province was considered a high officer of the frontier, for there were only 36 provinces in the entire Zhenwu Empire, and one had to be exceptionally capable to become a governor of a province. Feng Wu snorted when she recalled her interrupted cultivation. She then tossed the whip to Ning Chenxi. "Be my guest. Drive carefully though. We have a wounded person on board." Anyone else would have jumped at the opportunity to fawn over the son of a governor. Feng Wu, on the other hand, didn't even blink before ordering him around. Ning Chenxi's temperament was as fine as his family background. He wasn't offended by Feng Wu's order at all, but was only too happy to oblige. One shouldn't slap someone who had offered their help. The teenager was warm and helpful. Despite being rather goofy, he was a kind man nevertheless. Gradually, Feng Wu would reply and smile at him every now and then. Hence, when Feng Wu asked him about Linyuan province, the teenager kept nothing from her, and took the opportunity to ingratiate himself with her. Feng Wu asked in passing, "Why are you here all by yourself?" Ning Chenxi said, "Well, that's a long story. My mother's oldest sister is taking her daughter back to the imperial capital, and my mother and I were going to see them off to the border of Linyuan. However, we left something behind and I had to go back to fetch it, which was what slowed me down. No worries though. I'll catch up with them soon enough." "Your aunt is from the imperial capital." "That's right. She married into a much more influential family than mine. Do you know what a minister of the Board of Civil Office is?" Feng Wu almost rolled her eyes at him. Did she look that ignorant to him? The minister of the Board of Civil Office is responsible for the appointment, removal, examination, promotion, transfer, and decoration of all government officials in the empire and is the head of the ministers of all 6 boards. "Why is your aunt married to one?" Ning Chenxi stuck out his chest proudly. "Do you know what a minister of defense is, then?" Feng family nodded. "Of course. The Grand Council is a policy-making body which assists His Majesty with governing the empire. There are 7 ministers of the Grand Council, and every single one of them a very powerful official. Those are some very influential people. Why, your aunt is related to one as well." "That's right. My oldest uncle-in-law is a minister on the Board of Civil Office as well as on the Grand Council. That's very impressive. Don't you think so?" Feng Wu nodded. To find favor in the lovely girl's eyes, Ning Chenxi wished that he could name all the influential people he knew. He then said cheerfully, "Actually, my uncle-in-law isn't the most impressive person I know. Have you heard of Northern Feng Mansion?" Chapter 164. You won't understand. Chapter 164. You won't understand. Northern Feng Mansion? Feng Wu couldn't help but think of Feng Xuan, which made her arch an eyebrow. The Northern Feng general who guards the northern frontier, and who is said to be able to fend off 10,000 men all by himself. That's right. He's my mother's brother. Feng Wu nodded. The teenager tried his best to strike up a conversation. Have you heard the name Feng Xuan? Feng Xuan. Feng Wu replied in an even voice, unsure what answer she should give. The teenager asked another question. Surely you've heard of Jun Linyuan. His Royal Highness, then? Feng Wu was speechless for a brief moment. The guy was mentioned everywhere, and it would sound unrealistic if she said no. Hence she gave a nod. That made Ning Chenxi very excited. Feng Xuan is my cousin and His Royal Highness's buddy. They grew up together and are very close friends. He looked so proud to have Jun Linyuan as his cousin's friend. Feng Wu didn't know how to comment on the look on his face. You don't believe me? Seeing that Feng Wu wasn't interested, Ning Chenxi thought that she wasn't convinced. He said earnestly, I'm telling the truth. My cousin is really very good friends with His Royal Highness. I used to follow the Crown Prince around when I was little and lived in the imperial capital. If you want, I can ask my cousin to get His Royal Highness's autograph for you. All girls like such things, don't they? Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Ning Chenxi went on, when we get to the imperial capital, I can also ask my cousin to take you hunting in the West Mountain. You'll be able to meet His Royal Highness in person. That's something many girls can't stop dreaming about. Would you like that? Feng Wu looked at Ning Chenxi with an impassive face and didn't say a word. Ning Chenxi was confused. Why? Are you not happy to hear that? Feng Wu was at a loss of what to say. She asked in resignation, to you people, is Jun Linyuan that awesome a guy? Ning Chenxi looked ecstatic. Of course. His Royal Highness is the only person of my generation that I admire. I'm sure you already know how awesome he is, but do you know what the elders say about him? Obviously Ning Chenxi held Jun Linyuan in reverence, for he never addressed the guy by his full name and always used His Royal Highness. It was safe to say that to Ning Chenxi, Jun Linyuan was inviolable. Feng Wu shook her head. No, I don't. Ning Chenxi's excitement was apparent. There was this time when my dad, my uncle-in-law, and my uncle got together and chatted. My dad seldom comments on anyone, but that day he said with excitement that Jun Linyuan was the best gift to us all in the last thousands of years, if not tens of thousands. We'll be living in the best time ever in the foreseeable future. Someone as influential as my uncle-in-law is even more stern and solemn, and barely smiles at all. Even he nodded at that, and said that now was indeed the best time to work as a government official, and that our era will be recorded down in history and remembered forever. He said that it was an honor to work as an official in a time like this. Feng Wu frowned. That sounds quite exaggerated. It's not. Ning Chenxi stared at Feng Wu. Northern Feng General, my eldest uncle, is such a haughty and proud man. Even someone like him said that day that because of His Royal Highness, he saw hope for our empire to expand its borders and rule over the entire world. He believes that this is a time of great achievements that will be remembered throughout the ages. Feng Wu was baffled. Really? You won't understand. Ning Chenxi said. Just think of it this way, with the passage of time and the change in dynasties, the times that are constantly mentioned are the greatest eras. Chapter 165. Ghost. You've turned into a ghost. Chapter 165. Ghost. You've turned into a ghost. Times of peace and prosperity need wise rulers as well as reputable officials. My father said that a wise ruler is on the way, and all they needed to do was become reputable officials. You know what? I was over the moon when I heard that. My cousin and I swore right there, and then that we would become reputable officials that the wise ruler deserves. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She had no idea that Jun Linyuan was so popular among the people. Unfortunately, Ning Chenxi sighed. Did you know? His Royal Highness almost had his reputation ruined by a girl named Feng Wu. How can a girl who lost all her cultivation become the crown prince's wife? There's no way she can be a mother figure for the empire in the future. She doesn't deserve someone with such rare talent like His Royal Highness. Ning Chenxi grew more excited as he spoke and ultimately clenched both his fists. Feng Wu said, I thought the engagement was off? Ning Chenxi replied, that's the most fortunate part. Otherwise, many people would try to assassinate that Feng Wu girl. She would be long dead if the engagement wasn't called off. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. All of a sudden, Ning Chenxi said excitedly, there are all sorts of rumors nowadays, and I like one of them the most. It would be nice if it was true. And which one would that be? Feng Wu gave him a half-smile. It's said that every crown prince of the Zhenwu Empire has to have a girl with phoenix blood as his queen. The successor to the phoenix blood in this generation is Wuxia. Word on the street is that she's only 15, but is already a spiritual grandmaster. She's even close to reaching the spiritual elder state. Plus, she's also the goddess of Firmament Palace. If His Royal Highness has to marry someone, she's the most qualified candidate. Feng Wu smiled a little. Is that so? You know what? We know each other quite well by now, don't we? I can't keep calling you young lady or little girl. Do you mind telling me your name now? Ning Chenxi beamed at Feng Wu. We've had so much fun talking to each other that I don't think telling me your name will be a problem. Heh, was all the reply Feng Wu had for him. Fun talking to each other? Since when? Just then, Ning Chenxi spotted a temple standing tall on a mountain slope. He rose to his feet in excitement and said loudly to Feng Wu, that's Sumeru Temple over there. The place where I'm supposed to rendezvous with my mother. Young lady, it's not safe to travel after dark in the mountains. How about you take a break here with us? Feng Wu was about to turn him down when someone shrieked, why are you still alive? Feng Wu turned around. As the saying went, enemies were bound to meet. Feng Lu was here as well. Tossing her whip aside, Feng Wu headed straight for Feng Lu, keeping her cold, intense gaze on the latter. Feng Lu panicked at Feng Wu's reaction. However, she then recalled that she was a level 5 spiritual master after all, and there was no need to be afraid of Feng Wu. Feng Lu smirked and asked, what are you doing? Feng Wu didn't bother to reply. She kicked Feng Lu right in her abdomen. Bang! There was a loud sound. Feng Lu flew backward like a cannonball and smashed into an old tree, breaking it in half. She then slipped down the trunk and fell to the ground with a thump. Blood trickled down from the corner of Feng Lu's mouth and she stared at Feng Wu in horror. Ah, ghost. You've turned into a ghost. That's right. And I'm here to demand your life. How do you feel about that? Chapter 166. I'm not starting a fight, I'm beating her up. Chapter 166. I'm not starting a fight, I'm beating her up. Crouching down in front of Feng Lu, Feng Wu stared at her with a half-smile. Did you think you could kill me with those obsidian wolves? How naive. After that, Feng Wu straddled Feng Lu, raised her right fist, and punched Feng Lu in the face. Thump, thump, thump. Feng Wu's fist came down over and over again, sparing no effort. With her capability as a level 5 spiritual master, each of Feng Wu's punches made Feng Lu see stars. Her head spun and the pain was excruciating. If Feng Wu hadn't woken up in time or if she hadn't happened to have the repellent on her, what would have happened to her and her family? Feng Lu was stupefied. Ning Chenxi was completely at a loss. As a matter of fact, Ning Chenxi was terrified by Feng Wu's decisive move. When he came back to himself, Feng Lu was almost beaten to death. She was covered in blood. It was such a ghastly sight. The young lady's build was so slight that he had thought she would be blown away by the wind. However, she was the Hulk reincarnated when she started fighting. Ning Chenxi hadn't seen that coming. Young lady, don't fight. You shouldn't start a fight like this. Ning Chenxi tried to pull Feng Wu away from Feng Lu. Feng Wu looked up and smirked. I'm not starting a fight. I'm beating her up. Ning Chenxi realized that she was doing exactly that. The kind-hearted Ning Chenxi frowned. Is there a misunderstanding between you two? I don't think it's right to hit a girl like this. She lured those obsidian wolves there to kill me, and you call that a misunderstanding? Feng Wu snorted. Do you want to have such a misunderstanding? I can help you with that. That successfully shut Ning Chenxi up. But even if you hold a grudge against her, you take revenge at the first opportunity. There's no warming up period. Has your mother taught you nothing? Feng Wu glared at Ning Chenxi, who was in her way. Ning Chenxi was a naive teenager who was well protected by numerous guards, even when he went into the mountains for his cultivation. Because of his status, all those around him had only treated him with great caution and would do nothing to offend him. Never had anyone said such harsh things to him like Feng Wu. For a moment he stood there dazed, not knowing what to do. Teehee, a woman chuckled behind them. Mum, Ning Chenxi greeted an elegant lady, who stood at the front entrance of Sumeru Temple with one hand on her plump belly and the other supporting her back in resignation. Feng Wu looked up at the lady. She was in her 30s, fair-skinned and very charming. There was something very courageous about the look on her face, which gave her a rather valiant and heroic bearing. One look and Feng Wu knew that the lady wasn't someone that would niggle over petty things. How did a mother like that raise someone as tame as Ning Chenxi? Feng Wu greeted Mrs. Ning with a nod without saying anything. Mrs. Ning found Feng Wu an interesting girl. She smiled and nodded back at Feng Wu in greeting. However, the lady next to Mrs. Ning cast a stern look at Feng Wu and looked displeased. It was obvious that Feng Wu didn't impress her. Feng Wu figured that the other lady had to be Ning Chenxi's aunt, aka the wife of the minister on the board of civil office and on the Grand Council. Because of Ning Chenxi's intervention, footsteps came from inside Sumeru Temple. Feng Wu recognized right away that they belonged to Feng Yiran. Feng Wu had no choice but to rise to her feet and snort at Feng Lu. I'll let you live today. We're not done yet. She was as overbearing as she was aggressive. Mrs. Yan's brow furrowed tighter at those words. She didn't like this arrogant girl at all. Chapter 167. You're not in love with her, are you? Chapter 167. You're not in love with her, are you? Feng Yiran came out, only to see Feng Lu covered in blood. He was obviously shaken. Looking up, he met Feng Wu's gaze. What a pair of eyes! In them was a mix of aplomb, sneer, contempt and ridicule. Feng Yiran drew in his breath. He had the exact same thought as Feng Lu. Feng Wu was still alive. Looking behind Feng Wu, he saw her mother, Uncle Chiu and the others. They were all alive. Did you hit your sister? Feng Yiran moved closer to Feng Wu and looked down at her with a grim look in his eyes. Ning Chenxi's heart raced when he saw the ferocious look in Feng Yiran's eyes. Before he knew it, he had gone up to Feng Wu's side. He would come to Feng Wu's aid if Feng Yiran tried anything. Feng Wu stared back at Feng Yiran with a half-smile on her face. I have no sister. Although Feng Yiran, aren't you going to ask why I'm still standing here alive? Feng Yiran smirked. Why shouldn't you be? You fell behind a little, that's all. You caught up with us now, haven't you? Feng Yiran gave Feng Wu a threatening look, taking for granted that Feng Wu would get what he meant. I see you're going to deny it completely. That's okay. I still have some bloody flame fright liquid left. That's like the obsidian wolf's favorite snack, isn't it? Feng Yiran clenched his fists. How dare this smug girl threaten him? He would really like to snap her tiny neck now. However, Ning Chenxi stood resolutely by Feng Wu's side and kept his intimidating gaze on Feng Yiran. If the latter tried anything, Ning Chenxi wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. One had to admit that Ning Chenxi was a very capable teenager. I have no idea what you're talking about. Not daring to make any reckless move, Feng Yiran dragged Feng Lu back into the temple guiltily. Feng Wu smiled a little. Feng Lu would have to lick her wounds on her own now. What kind of person are you? Just then, someone shouted at Feng Wu in an untimely fashion. Looking up, Feng Wu saw a girl about 15 or 16 in age. She wore a lilac dress and had nice features. However, she looked rather angry, and was directing all of her fury at Feng Wu. Feng Wu looked back at her in confusion. That was your own sister back there. How could you beat her up like that? So what if you have some talent? Come, fight me now. The girl in lilac glared at Feng Wu and challenged her. Yin Yan, you're only making things more complicated. Ning Chenxi was flustered. He had no idea that the girl he liked would make her debut this way, and was even more surprised when his cousin, who liked to right wrongs, jumped out like that. He had been trying to persuade his mother to propose a marriage to the lovely girl's family only a moment ago. Ning Chenxi said to Feng Wu, sorry about that. This is Yin Yan, my cousin. She's rather ignorant. Please don't mind her. Cousin. Yin Yan flared up and pointed at Feng Wu. Did I ask you to apologize for me? That scumbag beat up her own sister and she tried to kill her. How can you speak up for someone like that? Didn't you see how miserable that other girl was? Ning Chenxi said, I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding. That doesn't give her any excuse to beat her sister up. She's a piece of shit. Yin Yan threw Ning Chenxi a dirty look. Cousin, you're not in love with her, are you? Ning Chenxi looked at Yin Yan and Feng Wu in turn, not knowing what to say. Chapter 168, Don't even think about it. Chapter 168. Don't even think about it. Yin Yan shrieked, Cousin. Are you blind or what? I'm telling you, don't be fooled by her pretty face. She's evil inside. Come back in with me. You need to stay away from her. Ning Chenxi shook his head. You guys go in first. After that, he ran up to Feng Wu and said with a smile, look, it's getting dark soon and I think it's going to rain. You shouldn't be traveling in such conditions. Even if you can take it, your fellow travelers may get sick, won't they? My family is well acquainted with the abbot here. How about you get some rest here tonight and resume your journey tomorrow? If it was up to Feng Wu, she wouldn't go inside. However, Ning Chenxi did have a point. She could stand a little rain, but not her beautiful mother and the others. As for what attitude those people would give her, Feng Wu didn't give a damn who rolled their eyes at them. Feng Wu nodded, then helped her mother inside, not feeling burdened at all. Sumeru Temple wasn't a big one at all. There was only one hall in total, and because the backyard had been destroyed by a fire recently, everyone had to stay in the main hall, but each team took a separate corner. Ning Chenxi's family took up half of the space, Feng Iran 1/4, while Feng Wu settled down in the remaining quarter. Ning Chenxi was helping Feng Wu get things ready. His mother didn't say anything, but Mrs. Yen wouldn't have it. With a stern look on her face, she reprimanded, Ning Chenxi, get over here. Ning Chenxi had found this aunt of his terrifying since he was little. His hand jolted at the bellow, but he still smiled at Feng Wu. Let me go see what it's about. I'll be back to help you soon. Feng Wu waved her hands. That's really unnecessary. I've got everything covered. No, please wait for me. I'll be right back. Ning Chenxi ran back to his family after that. Mrs. Yen glared at Ning Chenxi. What's that all about? How do you know her and why did you come here together? Mrs. Yen had always wanted to marry her daughter Yen Yen to Ning Chenxi, for the boy had grown up by her side and she preferred a son-in-law she knew through and through. However, the brat was courting some other girl now and Mrs. Yen was furious. Ning Chenxi said, I saw her surrounded by obsidian wolves on my way here, so I helped her drive the wolves away. After that, we just traveled together here. The main hall was an open space and neither Mrs. Yen nor Ning Chenxi tried to keep their voices down. Hence, everyone heard what they said. Feng Iran was treating Feng Lu's wounds. At those words, he exchanged grim looks with Feng Lu. Ning Chenxi. It had indeed been his doing. Feng Lu stared at Ning Chenxi with eyes that spat venom. Feng Wu would have been long dead if it wasn't for that man. And she wouldn't have gone through such humiliation. Ning Chenxi is the son of Ningzan, the governor of Linyuan province, Feng Iran reminded Feng Lu in a cold voice. His eldest uncle-in-law is the minister on the board of civil office and on the Grand Council. And his eldest uncle is the northern Feng general, Feng Sun's father. The guy was so well connected. Feng Lu didn't dare resent Ning Chenxi anymore. Instead she stared at Feng Wu. I'll remember what you did forever, Feng Wu. One day, I'll chop you into pieces myself. Meanwhile, Mrs. Yen and Yen Yen were both eyeing Ning Chenxi sternly, especially Mrs. Yen, who was warning Ning Chenxi in a serious tone. Ning Chenxi, I'm telling you, you've already given her the necessary help. Stay away from her from now on. I forbid you from going near her again. Ning Chenxi lowered his gaze and no one knew what was going on in his head. Chapter 169 I Won't Argue with a Dying Woman. Chapter 169 I Won't Argue with a Dying Woman. Yin Yin nodded repeatedly. Cousin, a woman as fierce as that won't need your help. She's perfectly capable of doing all the fighting herself. Your top priority now should be my aunt's health. She had a tummy ache just a while ago. Ning Chenxi asked Mrs. Ning in a hurry, Mother, are you all right? Mrs. Ning smiled broadly. Don't worry. It only hurts a little. I'll be fine after some rest. Although what happened back there was indeed a family affair. It isn't appropriate to get too involved. I see. Ning Chenxi lowered his head. Over in the other corner, Feng Lu heard their conversation and was elated. Without Ning Chenxi's help, Feng Wu was doomed. She threw another dirty look at Feng Wu. Having vented her anger on Feng Wu felt great at the moment. Right now, she had set up an iron pot over the fire to boil some water before putting some dried noodles in it. After the noodles were cooked, she put them into 4 wooden bowls, then sprinkled them with her specially made condiments and dried vegetables. Soon a remarkable aroma filled the hall, making everyone's mouths water. Yin Yin darted a look in Feng Wu's direction, intrigued. It was just boiled noodles, but why was theirs so appetizing? What had they put in it? Because they were in a temple, all meat and fish were forbidden. The Ning family was also making noodles, but it was nothing compared with Feng Wu's. The Ning family was simply boiling noodles in plain water, which didn't look appealing at all. Ning Chenxi had already run up to Feng Wu with his bowl, and he stared at her with puppy dog eyes. Recalling how he had stood up for her outside, Feng Wu sighed. We don't have much left. Half a bowl is all I can give you. No problem. Ning Chenxi beamed at her. Ning Chenxi's eyes lit up after a small bite. He gave Feng Wu a thumbs up with an exaggerated expression on his face. Gosh, this is great. It's scrumptious. That's the most tasty noodles I've ever tried in my life. Yin Yin was very displeased at Ning Chenxi's compliment of Feng Wu. She smirked at Feng Wu. Little sister, I see you've learned to trade your good looks for favors at such a young age. How impressive. Feng Wu was going to deny it, but seeing the jealous look on Yin Yan's face, she gave the latter a half smile. At least I'm good-looking enough to do that. You're welcome to try. You. Yin Yan almost had a heart attack. No one could deny Feng Wu's unmatched beauty. Yin Yan, on the other hand, was a pleasant-looking girl at most. Mrs. Yen frowned and cast a stern look at Yin Yan. It's important for a girl to be demure, humble, impassive, and mild. What kind of behavior is that? Mother, she started it first. Yin Yan protested, biting her lower lip. She didn't like that girl. Not at all. Mrs. Yen glowered at Yin Yan. Are you going to copy how ill-bred people behave now? Have you forgotten everything I've taught you? You're retaking your etiquette classes after we get back to the imperial capital. Mrs. Yen threw Feng Wu a dirty look full of contempt as she said this. Examining Mrs. Yan's face, Feng Wu smiled a little. She asked Ning Chenxi, is that your eldest aunt? Yes. Please don't be mad at her. She speaks harsh words, but she's all kind and soft deep down. Feng Wu waved her hand. I'm not mad at her. You're such a kind person. I won't get angry with a dying woman. Feng Wu smiled. Chapter 170 Maybe she still has a chance. Chapter 170. Maybe she still has a chance. On hearing Feng Wu call Mrs. Ning a dying woman, Ning Chenxi didn't realize what she meant at first, but Yin Yin reacted right away. She rushed toward Feng Wu, stomped her foot, and glared at the latter. What did you just say? Feng Wu shrugged. I think you heard me clearly. Yin Yin was furious. You! She wanted to hit Feng Wu, but Ning Chenxi stopped her in time. Yin Yin, what are you doing here? Go back to your mother. Ning. Chin. Are you deaf and blind? She just called my mother a dying woman and you're still taking her side? Are you even my family at all? You've lost your head over that pretty face. Ning Chenxi stole a glance at his aunt, whose face was contorted with rage. The lady was practically spitting fire from her eyes. All her guards had their hands on their sabers as well. Ning Qianxi was conflicted. However, he still turned to Feng Wu in the end. Can you maybe apologize to my aunt? A few steps away, Feng Lu and Feng Yiran feigned indifference, but were actually paying close attention to everything. Seeing that Feng Wu had been bold enough to curse Mrs. Yan, the brother and sister were beside themselves with joy. It seemed that they didn't have to do anything after all. Feng Wu wouldn't live to see another sunrise. At that thought they exchanged smiles. Feng Wu darted a look at Ning Qianxi and frowned. Why should I? I'm only telling the truth. In fact, if you really care for her, you should find her an excellent medicine refiner. Maybe she'll still have a chance. Bang! Even Mrs. Yan, who was all about good manners, couldn't stand it anymore. With a wave of her hand, all 12 guards surrounded Feng Wu and her people. The guards were solemn-faced, emotionless, and looked ready to kill. Whoosh! They drew out their weapons in unison, looking rather intimidating. Behind them, Mrs. Yan and Mrs. Ning walked toward Feng Wu arm in arm. Mrs. Yan was obviously offended, while Mrs. Ning, who had liked Feng Wu in the beginning, was frowning at her as well. Wow! Was there going to be a fight? Kill Feng Wu. Now! Feng Lu was so excited that she clenched her fists and watched with unblinking eyes. Frowning at Feng Wu, Mrs. Ning was the first to speak. Young lady, have we done something to offend you? How can you curse us like that? Feng Wu shook her head. I wasn't cursing you. What were you doing then? Reminding you. Reminding us? Mrs. Ning frowned. Are you saying that my sister is really terminally ill? Yes. Feng Wu nodded solemnly. Mrs. Yin snickered. You have neither felt my pulse nor asked me about my symptoms. How can you be so sure that I'm seriously ill? You're only making things up. I'm perfectly fine and there's nothing wrong with me. You're nothing but an ignorant girl. Stop acting like some master medicine refiner. Mrs. Yan, you don't feel anything out of the ordinary at all? Do you not have palpitations when you wake up in the middle of the night? Or headaches a little past noon? Do you not get a dull stomach ache after each meal? Feng Wu stared at Mrs. Yan with a half-smile. Mrs. Yan went stiff right away. Seeing her reaction, Feng Wu smiled. Mrs. Yan, you know better than anyone else how you really feel, don't you? And I think you know that I'm not making anything up. Mother, do you really not feel well? Sister. Aunt. Everyone turned to Mrs. Yan in concern. Chapter 171 Boy and Girl Twins. Chapter 171 Boy and Girl Twins. Mrs. Yan waved her hand. I had my window open when I took a nap the other day, and I caught a cold. I'll be fine after taking some medicine. It's not even close to some incurable disease. The girl is talking nonsense. Yin Yan glared at Feng Wu. What more do you have to say? Feng Wu smiled. Concealing a malady and refusing to consult a doctor is the worst habit. If you don't cherish your life, no one else will cherish it for you. Mrs. Yin glowered. That's enough. How dare a girl like you meddle in my business? That's out of line. Feng Wu gave Mrs. Yan a half-smile and sighed. Mrs. Yan, do try to stay calm. The blood clot in your head will explode if you get too excited and I might be blamed for your death. I won't be able to defend myself if that happens. So, please go back as calmly as you can manage. You brat, Yin Yan wanted to hit Feng Wu. Feng Wu waved her hand at her. Miss Yan, if I were you, I'd spend more time with your mother in her last days. Young lady, that's not a very nice thing to say. Mrs. Ning stared at Feng Wu. She had liked Feng Wu in the beginning but not so much anymore. Feng Wu shifted her gaze to Mrs. Ning's belly. She frowned and asked Mrs. Ning, do you mind if I feel your pulse? Yes, we do. Yin Yan rejected Feng Wu right away. Do you have any idea who she is? She's the wife of the governor of Linyuan province. What if you try something when you feel her pulse? Plus, there's something so aggressive about you. Who knows what that aura will do to my aunt? Mrs. Ning gestured at Yan Yan to quieten down, then gave Feng Wu her hand. I think the young lady does know a thing or two about medicine. Please feel my pulse and tell me what you think. A few steps away, Feng Lu and Feng Yiran exchanged looks. What a load of bullshit Feng Wu was coming up with. They had no idea that she knew anything about medicine at all. Feng Wu felt Mrs. Ning's pulse and drew back her fingers in less than 3 seconds. Both Yan Yan and Mrs. Yin smiled in contempt. All doctors felt a pulse for different lengths of time, but no one could feel it for as short as 3 seconds. One might not even find a pulse in so short a time. The girl was nothing but a pretty face. "Aunt, she's bluffing again." "I knew it." Yin Yin snickered. Feng Wu smiled. "Mrs. Ning is 8 months pregnant. Of the twins, one of them is well developed with adequate nutrition. The other one, though. Plus, their umbilical cords are wrapped around their necks. I'm afraid you're going to have a difficult labor." Yin Yin burst into laughter. "Aunt, I told you. I knew she was going to exaggerate just to scare you. She's going to swindle money out of you now." Mrs. Ning ignored Yin Yin. Keeping her gaze on Feng Wu, she asked, "They?" Feng Wu nodded. "You're having boy and girl twins." "Ha ha ha." Yin Yin laughed loudly. "Aunt, just look at her fake sincerity. Twins, she says. And boy and girl twins? That's ridiculous. All the medicine refiners we consulted before we left told us that you were going to have one baby." Feng Wu looked at Mrs. Ning and said in an indifferent tone, "There are 2 babies. But the girl is being robbed of all her nutrition and her heart is barely beating. Together with the umbilical cord around her neck, I don't think she'll have much of a chance." Chapter 172. What? A wave of magical beasts? Chapter 172. What? A wave of magical beasts. Mrs. Ning stared at Feng Wu. In fact, she had always felt that she was having 2 babies, but all the medicine refiners she had consulted had told her that there was only one. She had had no choice but to accept that conclusion until now. "How can you prove it?" Mrs. Ning asked earnestly. Feng Wu shrugged. "You'll see when you're in labor. However, in order to keep the baby girl alive, you must take very good care of yourself and carry your pregnancy to full term. Otherwise..." Mrs. Ning nodded. Yin Yin was vexed. Tugging at Mrs. Ning, she yelled, "Aunt, that's all bullshit. You can't believe her." Mrs. Ning rubbed her forehead. "Call it motherly instinct, but I feel the same." The corner of Yin Yan's mouth twitched. She was going to say something else, but Mrs. Ning cut her off. Mrs. Ning smiled at Feng Wu. "No matter what happens, thank you for your reminder." She nodded at Feng Wu, then led the others back to their corner. Qiuling pursed her lips. "My mistress is the best medicine refiner on this continent. They'll soon learn their lesson." Feng Wu stuffed a fruit in Qiuling's mouth. "Get some rest. Tomorrow morning." Just then there was a loud bang. Something rumbled in the far distance. The entire Sumeru temple shook violently as if there was an earthquake. Everyone was shocked. "What happened?" "Look after my mother." "I'll go have a look," Feng Wu told Qiuling. The explosive sound made her restless, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Seeing Feng Wu run out of Sumeru temple, Ning Chenxi followed her out. Yin Yin ran out after Ning Chenxi. Sumeru temple was halfway up the mountain and didn't have the best range of vision. Feng Wu jumped onto the roof at once, looking in the direction of that sound. The evening glow painted the sky blood red, creating a rather terrifying picture. Rumble! There came another loud sound. The blurry image of an enormous dragon suddenly appeared among the red clouds. It was such a forbidding and frightening image. Feng Wu's heart sank. The image disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, and was completely gone in a matter of seconds. Apart from Feng Wu, who had been standing on top of the roof, no one else saw it. Feng Wu jumped down immediately and headed back. "What's wrong?" Ning Chenxi caught up with Feng Wu and saw that she was grim-faced and very stiff, as if she had seen something terrifying. Yin Yin was also confused. Feng Wu had jumped onto the roof before coming back down after a few seconds and heading back in a hurry. What had she seen? It was just thunder, wasn't it? Feng Wu said to Ning Chenxi as she walked, "If I've guessed correctly, a wave of magical beasts is coming. You should get going." "What? A wave of magical beasts?" Ning Chenxi shook his head involuntarily. "It can't be. That was just thunder and nothing more. It can't be something as serious as magical beasts. Plus, it's not the right season. They usually only come out in winter." However, Feng Wu didn't say another word to him. She only told Qiuling, "Pack our things now. We're leaving." That successfully surprised everyone. However, Qiuling never questioned anything Feng Wu said. The three of them all got up, packed their things, and were ready to go in less than a minute. Chapter 173. That's ridiculous. Chapter 173. That's ridiculous. Ning Chenxi stood there dazed. Why were they leaving all of a sudden? Mrs. Ning rose to her feet, helped by Mrs. Yan. She darted a glance at Feng Wu, then asked Ning Chenxi with a frown, "What's going on?" Ning Chenxi looked at Feng Wu and Mrs. Ning in turn, the look on his face a little grim. She said that a wave of magical beasts is coming. But it's not the right season. How can there be a rampage of magical beasts at this time of the year? After that, Ning Chenxi tugged at Feng Wu. The sun is setting and fog is rising up. The mountains will be filled with magical beasts. With the elderly and the wounded, you'll never be able to get out of here. Please trust me on this. There is no wave of magical beasts. Can you please wait until sunrise and set out with the rest of us? Feng Wu looked back at Ning Chenxi earnestly. Please trust me on this. 2 emperor-level magical beasts are fighting in Frozen Forest, and one of them is a demonic blood dragon. Whatever's fighting the dragon can only be as capable. The battle between 2 powerful creatures will create a lot of collateral damage, and all the magical beasts in Frozen Forest will run away from the woods for their lives, which will in turn make us the collateral damage. This Sumeru temple. Feng Wu looked up and shook her head. This temple won't even last until tomorrow morning. It'll be wiped off the face of the earth by the end of tonight. Ning Chenxi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Do you always expect the worst? Are you paranoid or what? We have so many capable men here. Seeing that he wasn't convinced, Feng Wu lost her patience talking to him. She went up to Mrs. Ning instead and looked the lady in the eye. I think you're a smart lady. The others won't take me seriously, but maybe you will. If I've guessed right, a wave of magical beasts isn't the only thing we'll get tonight. What worries me most is that a battle of that level will stir up the land's core and start an earthquake. If that happens, the impact will extend much further beyond the perimeter of Frozen Forest. Mrs. Ning, with your pregnancy, it'll be too much for your body to handle. If you can, please leave ASAP. After that, Feng Wu waved her hand and let her team out. The beautiful lady looked baffled and was completely at a loss as to what was going on. However, Feng Wu had always been the one who called the shots in the family, so the beautiful lady got into the carriage without any objections. Uncle Qiu wanted to take the driver's seat, but Feng Wu turned him down. We're going to have a very bumpy ride ahead of us. I'll take it from here. Uncle Qiu, please take the time to recover. I think we're going to have a nasty fight ahead. Feng Wu's face was calm and solemn, which proved how imminent the crisis was. Uncle Qiu nodded. He sat down cross-legged in the carriage right away and began to regulate his energy. Feng Wu and her people left in such a hurry it was as if they had never been there. Everyone else was still baffled even when Feng Wu was gone. They exchanged awkward looks. A wave of magical beasts? Earthquake? Ha ha ha, that's ridiculous. Feng Lu smirked. She's lying her ass off just to get away. To get away? Yin Yan stared at Feng Lu. Feng Lu couldn't wait to play up to Yin Yan. She said obsequiously, she's offended both your people and mine in this hall. With all the weaklings and cripples on her side, do you think she can sleep tonight? That's why she came up with this grand excuse so that she can leave without being stopped. You've all been fooled. How nervous you all look, ha ha ha. Chapter 174. Do you have a death wish? Chapter 174. Do you have a death wish? Yin Yan stomped her foot angrily. How can she be so disgusting? I was really frightened back there. I thought the magical beasts and earthquake were really coming. Ah, I'm so angry. Mrs. Yin snorted. There are all sorts of women in this world. Ning Chenxi, keep your eyes wide open and steer clear of such girls. Otherwise, you'll be counting money for her when she sells you off. Sister, am I right? Mrs. Ning, however, was frowning. Caressing her belly involuntarily with her right hand, she said quietly, but I think the young lady does have a point. What? Everyone turned to look at Mrs. Ning. Mrs. Ning pressed her hand to her chest. Somehow, I'm awfully nervous tonight and I keep feeling that something big is going to happen. It's giving me the jitters. Mrs. Yen snorted. Why do you think? The girl hinted at ill fortune for your kids. As a mother, of course you'd feel restless. That girl was really... Sister. Mrs. Ning cut her off. I think we should leave now. Everyone was now looking at Mrs. Ning as if she had lost her mind. Mrs. Yen shrieked, nonsense. How are we going to travel in the middle of the night when you're this pregnant? What if you fall out of the carriage? Do you have a death wish? However, Mrs. Ning was more determined than ever. She rose to her feet and instructed Ning Chenxi. Tell the others we're leaving in an hour. Sister, I've made up my mind. Please stop. Mrs. Yen knew that despite Mrs. Ning's harmless appearance, her younger sister would stick to it when she had made up her mind. No one would be able to make her decide otherwise. At that thought, Mrs. Yen couldn't help but begin to hate Feng Wu. Brother, how about us? Somehow, Feng Lu suddenly felt rather restless, especially when Mrs. Yen and the others packed up to leave. Feng Yuan darted Feng Lu a look. What do you think? Feng Lu snorted. Will things happen just because Feng Wu said so? She's just an ordinary human being. I don't care what others think, but I'm not buying it. I'll die here in this Sumeru temple before I leave. All of a sudden, rumble. An ear-splitting sound exploded above Sumeru temple. The entire temple shook violently, as if a giant hand had grabbed hold and was shaking it. Crackle. The walls crumbled and began to crack. It wasn't just the walls. The earth began to crack as well. The shake stopped as quickly as they'd come, but it was enough to frighten everyone. Both Mrs. Yen and Yen Yen blanched and were bewildered. Despite being pregnant, Mrs. Ning was the most level-headed person in the room. She said succinctly, stop packing. Leave all the heavy load behind. We're leaving now. But will it be safer outside? Yen Yen objected. Mrs. Ning said, this road will get us to Wanping town, where the terrain is open and there are soldiers stationed there. We'll be much safer there than in the mountains. This Sumeru temple will probably be gone by the end of the night. Let's go. Mrs. Ning got into a carriage immediately after that and told the driver to set out. Mrs. Yen might look all stern and solemn, but she was much less level-headed in such a situation. She was already panicking by now, and taking Yen Yen with her, they joined Mrs. Ning in her carriage. Chapter 175. The Magical Beasts Are Coming. Chapter 175. The Magical Beasts Are Coming. Just then there was a loud rumbling from the woods. Mrs. Ning blanched at the sound. She had accompanied Ning Xian, her husband, when he was stationed at Wanping town back in the day, and he had defended the town against waves of magical beasts then. As a result, Mrs. Ning was very familiar with that sound. A wave of magical beasts is coming. Let's go. Quickly. Oh God, so the magical beasts were really coming. The carriage driver whipped the horses hard. The horses galloped off at an unbelievable speed along the mountain track. Feng Lu and Feng Yuan looked equally bewildered. The magical beasts were really coming. The rumbling they heard came from none other than the earth shaking as countless magical beasts rushed toward them. Let's go. Throwing Feng Lu onto a horse, Feng Yuan took another horse and dashed off with her. Feng Lu felt like screaming. However, she had no time to resent Feng Wu now, for every second had to be spent on running for her life. They heard more rumbling 3 minutes after they set out. There came a loud sound. Through a gap in the curtains, Yin Yin watched as a herd of magical beasts trampled over Sumeru Temple, which was reduced to shambles in no time. Oh my God! Covering her mouth with one hand, Yin Yin grabbed her mother's hand with the other. Sumeru Temple, the temple. Mrs. Yin turned around, and what she saw almost made her pass out. Sumeru Temple was gone. Mrs. Ning looked over her shoulder and coldly said, we should thank that young lady for her reminder. We'd all be dead by now if it wasn't for her. Mrs. Yin looked away and Yin Yin snorted under her breath, reluctant to admit her fault. Mrs. Ning asked Ning Chenxi, what's that young lady's name? We must thank her for this. Even the smallest help should be returned generously, not to mention that she just saved our lives. Ning Chenxi scratched his head. Her name? Well, I haven't gotten to that part yet. Mrs. Ning was speechless. No wonder he was getting nowhere with the young lady. He didn't even know her name. Why did she have such a dumb son? Rumble. The magical beasts were running fast. Before long they were in sight. Aunt, stop talking about that girl. We need to hurry up. They're catching up to us. Seeing the magical beasts that were less than a kilometer behind them, Yin Yan was almost in tears. They're here. They're on us. Mrs. Yin said, "It's good that we weren't the last ones. The brother and sister left after us and we're only 500 meters ahead of the beasts. They'll be eaten before we are." Mrs. Ning almost rolled her eyes at her sister. However, she was too busy directing the carriage to say anything. All of a sudden, rumble. The ground beneath them gave way. The narrow track they were traveling along cracked suddenly and Mrs. Ning felt a sharp pain in her belly. Crumble. The two horses pulling their carriage were terrified of the magical beasts to begin with, and they went into meltdown as the earth shook. They were now rushing toward the edge of the cliff with the carriage. The carriage was on the steepest part of the track now. On one side was the precipitous cliff and the other side the valley. The sudden change in direction frightened everyone on board. No! Mrs. Yin and Yin Yin screamed at the top of their lungs. They had forgotten all about being graceful. The carriage plunged into the valley. It was such a long way down the slope. Meanwhile, Feng was driving their carriage as fast as she could. Because they had left 15 minutes earlier than the others, they were still relatively safe. Chapter 176 My face is scratched. Chapter 176. My face is scratched. Miss, the magical beasts are coming. They really are. Qiuling drew in her breath, fighting back the terror in her voice. Feng said, "Don't worry. I've taken a shortcut and it won't be long before we reach Wanping town. We'll be on a stretch of open land once we're out of the mountains. Even if there's an earthquake then it won't affect us that much." Yes. Qiuling made a fist. No matter how tough the situation was, Qiuling would always feel reassured when her mistress was around. Looking out the window, she saw what was happening up on the cliff and her eyes popped out. "Miss, look. It's Mrs. Ning's carriage. They're falling down from up there." Feng looked up and her pupils contracted. Mrs. Ning and the others couldn't possibly survive that fall. At that thought, Feng jumped down from the carriage and told Uncle Qiu, "Get our carriage away from here. I'll be right back." There was no time to waste. Feng looked around and spotted a big tree. She immediately jumped onto it, as nimble as a monkey. Just as the carriage fell down, her whip lashed out to wrap around the carriage, and Feng pulled with all her might. Crumble. The carriage shattered right away and the passengers inside were pulled in Feng direction. Instead of falling all the way to the ground below, they rolled out onto the thick tree branches. Feng only had enough time to catch Mrs. Ning with her whip. The rest of the passengers rolled down the tree branches and fell to the ground with a series of thumping sounds. The others cried out in pain as they hit the ground, but because of the leafy old tree, which had acted as a buffer, none of them were severely injured. Carrying Mrs. Ning, Feng landed lightly on the ground. A look of pleasant surprise appeared on Mrs. Ning's pale face. "I'm not dead." Feng nodded. "You're alive, Mrs. Ning, but things are not looking good for you. Several of your ribs were broken during the fall and one of them has pierced your heart, which is bleeding now." Mrs. Ning gave her a wry smile. "That explains my difficulty breathing and the throbbing pain in my chest." Feng didn't know what to say. She was amazed by how carefree Mrs. Ning was. The lady was still able to smile in such a situation. "It's not just your ribs. The babies aren't doing well either." Feng frowned. Ning Chenxi scrambled toward them and looked agitated. "Is my mum in danger? What are we going to do now?" Feng said with a frown, "Obviously, the best thing for her is to be treated right here and now, but I don't think I need to remind you that with the wave of magical beasts behind us, treating her now is as good as getting everyone killed." Although Feng still had the repellent, it was only for wolves. She wasn't sure if it would work on other beasts. Moreover, no repellent would be potent enough against a herd of rampaging magical beasts. "Oh God, my face. My face is scratched." Yin Yin wiped her face and cried out when she saw the blood on her hands. Feng took off her vest, tore it into strips of cloth, and quickly bound Mrs. Ning's wounds. We're in no condition to treat her right now. The only option for us is to get to Wanping Town ASAP. That way we might stand a chance. Sure. Ning Chenxi was befuddled as soon as he said that. But our carriage. The horses had been killed by the fall and the carriage was all shattered. How were they going to outrun those frantic beasts on their feet? Chapter 177 Kicking Her Out. Chapter 177, Kicking Her Out. Before Feng Wu said a word, Yin Yin glared at her and said, "Your carriage is requisitioned. Name your price." Feng Wu eyed Yin Yin as if she was looking at an idiot. She then ignored Yin Yin completely and frowned at Ning Chenxi. "Bring your mother into the carriage. She can't afford any more delays. We need to set out now." Seeing that Yin Yin was getting into the carriage as well, Feng Wu kicked her out. "You!" Yin Yin stumbled back in disbelief. She pointed a finger at Feng Wu and yelled, "You didn't save me just then and let my face get destroyed by the branches. I'll forgive you for that. But you just kicked me out of the carriage. How dare you? Do you have any idea who I am? I don't care who you are. You're not getting into my carriage. Bite me." After that, Feng Wu cracked her whip and the horses galloped out. "You! Stop there! Stop!" Yin Yin thought that she was going to lose her mind. Behind her was the wave of unstoppable magical beasts and she had just been kicked out of a carriage. She was the daughter of the minister on the board of civil office and on the Grand Council. Feng Wu smirked. "You're too heavy and we can't afford to have you on board. Run for your life if you still cherish it." Feng Wu flicked her whip as she spoke and the horses dashed forward. Yin Yin was wild with rage. She had never expected that Feng Wu would really make her run after the carriage like this. That woman. I swear I'm going to kill her one day. Yin Yin vented her hatred in her head. Ning Chenxi was as concerned about Mrs. Ning as he was about the two galloping horses. He asked in consternation, "Are they going to go berserk? What if they do?" "They won't," Feng Wu said sternly and focused on controlling the horses. In such a situation, she was the only one who could adequately command the two fine horses so that they could run at top speed. Leaning against Ning Chenxi, Mrs. Ning saw that the young lady could drive the horses so smoothly in such a situation and was even more amazed by Feng Wu. She told Ning Chenxi, "If you had paid more attention to the horses, you would have noticed that their ears are stuffed up. With their ears plugged, the horses couldn't hear any noise, which was why they weren't frightened." Mrs. Ning was so intrigued. She had never met such a smart girl before. Mrs. Yin kept turning around to look behind them, for Yin Yin was still running. More than once she wanted to beg Feng Wu to let Yin Yin in, but her pride stopped her in the end. Luckily, Yin Yin was pretty fast and her will to survive only gave her more strength. She was able to follow the carriage closely so far. Rumble! Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Streaks of lightning struck down. Rain began to fall heavily. A mud avalanche rushed down the mountain in the distance. Mrs. Yin looked at where Sumeru Temple used to be. The entire mountain had been wiped off the face of the earth by the earthquake. She couldn't help but dart another look at Feng Wu. Was the girl really that capable or had she just gotten lucky? However, recalling Feng Wu's resolute and decisive moves, Mrs. Yin couldn't help but frown again. Controlling the horses, Feng Wu avoided countless pits and falling stones. Finally, they were outside Wanping Town. By then, the magical beasts were less than 1,000 meters from them. "Open the gate! Open the gate now!" Ning Chenxi ran out of the carriage and brandished his governor's token. The gatekeepers wouldn't have opened the gate for anyone else, for the magical beasts were so close and it would be too dangerous to do so. However, the token represented the governor of Linyuan province, and they couldn't afford to take it lightly. Chapter 178, How unfortunate for her. Chapter 178. How unfortunate for her. Quickly! Open the gate! General Wu, who was stationed at Wanping Town, gave the command. The rest of you prepare to shoot the magical beasts. Because of all the passengers, Feng Wu's carriage was a little slower. Feng Lu and Feng Yiran were much quicker on horseback. Seeing that the gate was open, Feng Lu's pupils contracted. Whipping her horse, she tried to get in front of Feng Wu. Feng Wu smirked, then flicked her whip at Feng Lu. Ah! Feng Lu cried out in pain and glared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu said in a righteous tone, "Mrs. Ning needs to be treated. Jump the queue again and you'll never get in." Mrs. Ning? Feng Lu was shocked. Just then, Mrs. Yen lifted the curtain and stared at Feng Lu with a stern look in her eyes. Feng Lu felt as if a hand was squeezing her heart hard. She didn't expect Mrs. Ning to really be on board. Feng Wu snorted. Then with a crack of her whip, the carriage was inside Wanping town. Feng Lu and Feng Iran ran in after her. The moment before the gate closed, Yin Yin arrived, gasping. The magical beasts were almost at her elbow. The guard at the gate pulled Yin Yin in while aiming his spear at a magical beast behind her. Thud! The beast was impaled on the spear, and with a thump the gate was closed. It was a narrow escape. Lying on the ground, Yin Yin cursed Feng Wu in her head with all the obscenities she could think of. Covered in Mrs. Ning's blood, Ning Chenxi yelled at General Wu, "General Wu, quickly! Get someone here to save my mother. She needs help." Needless to say, General Wu knew who Ning Chenxi was. The man's heart lurched at those words. "Is Mrs. Ning injured?" Ning Chenxi was worried sick and nodded repeatedly. "Young Master Ba! Young Master Ba!" General Wu ran out and dragged a young medicine refiner to their side from a few steps away. "There. This is young Master Ba, the grandson of Master Ba. He learned everything from the old master. I'm sure he'll save Mrs. Ning." One's fame traveled further than oneself. Master Ba was well known all over the Zhenwu Empire, and Ning Chenxi was a little relieved to see that young Master Ba was here. Feng Wu was going to treat Mrs. Ning, but everyone else was focused on young Master Ba. Qiuling looked at her mistress. Even the old man himself had to ask for Feng Wu's advice, but all these people were listening to that young Master Ba only and ignoring her mistress. Were they blind? Young Master Ba rushed to their side right away. Seeing that Feng Wu was going to treat Mrs. Ning, he bellowed, "Who the hell are you? Stop right there. How dare you touch Mrs. Ning?" Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Qiuling looked at him in indignation. This young Master Ba was so rude. Mrs. Yen and Yin Yen had been waiting for an opportunity to pick on Feng Wu. Hearing young Master Ba's words, they shoved Feng Wu to the side. "We were in a rush back there and had to let you have your way. Now that young Master Ba is here, you're redundant. Get lost." Yin Yin yelled at Feng Wu, "If my aunt is somehow harmed by your treatment, I'll kill everyone in your family." Feng Wu was never mild in temperament. Hearing those words, she smirked. "Fine, you've just killed Mrs. Ning. She has to be the most unfortunate person in the world to have you lot as her relatives." Chapter 179 She's Dead. Chapter 179 She's Dead. "How dare you curse my aunt?" Yin Yin turned around and glared at Ning Chenxi. "Did you hear what she said? She cursed your mother. Are you going to take this evil woman's side?" Ning Chenxi was sick with concern. Glaring at Yin Yin, he said impatiently, "Shut up." Meanwhile, young Master Ba had begun to treat Mrs. Ning, who had passed out in the carriage. "Mrs. Ning isn't going to make it." Young Master Ba shook his head, the look on his face grave. 5 of her ribs are broken, her heart is punctured, the baby has suffered from the severe impact, and she's bleeding out. This is too severe. Young Master Ba blanched. Which should he treat first? The ribs, the heart, the baby, or the hemorrhage? This was impossible. As soon as he lay Mrs. Ning flat, he realized with shock that she's not breathing. And I can't find her pulse. In a matter of minutes, Mrs. Ning had drained of all color and her face was ghastly pale. She had lost all signs of life. We've lost her, she's gone." Blood covered young Master Ba's hands and he looked defeated. He turned to Ning Chenxi and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Ning was too badly injured. I think you should start to prepare for her funeral." Mrs. Yen was stunned. Yin Yan's eyes were wide open as well. Ning Chenxi stared at his mother in disbelief. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. All this happened in a matter of minutes. It was too quick. Ning Chenxi wouldn't believe it. He rushed to Mrs. Ning's side to check her breathing, And there was none. Her pulse was gone as well. Grabbing young Master Ba by the collar, Ning Chenxi yelled, "How can she be dead? How? Why can't you save her? Save her!" Mrs. Yen burst into tears. That was her own sister. She couldn't be dead. No. Staring at young Master Ba, she said, "I don't believe you. She can't be dead. She was all right just a minute ago. She said she could treat my sister, why can't you?" Mrs. Yen pointed at Feng Wu. "The symptoms she described were exactly what you told us, but she said she could cure her." Young Master Ba glared at Feng Wu vexed. "You said that?" Feng Wu nodded and said calmly, "I did." "Are you insane?" Young Master Ba glowered at Feng Wu. "She has 5 broken ribs and a punctured heart, which are enough to kill her. Together with the metrorrhagia, what can you possibly do to save her?" Feng Wu smirked. "I can do it." "Bullshit. Even my grandfather can't do that, not to mention a callow girl like you." Young Master Ba was wild with rage. He then turned to Mrs. Yen and Ning Chenxi. "Are you going to listen to an ignorant girl like her? Who's the medicine refiner here? She or me? Mrs. Ning is beyond saving and my skills have nothing to do with it. Your grandfather would never have given up before even trying, nor would he make excuses for himself. I feel sorry for him for feeling apologetic toward you. As a matter of fact, you're not worthy to be his grandson." Feng Wu gave young Master Ba a stern glance. Ba Jiaming eyed Feng Wu ferociously, his face scarlet and his eyes spitting fire. "Who on earth are you?" Feng Wu snorted. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that I can cure Mrs. Ning and you just killed her." Chapter 180 She's Back? Chapter 180 She's Back. Next to them, General Wu was scared out of his wits. Mrs. Ning was dead. The wife of the governor of Linyuan province died in Wanping town under his watch. He was so getting executed for this. Even if he could survive the punishment, his career as a soldier was finished. Young Master Ba was still smirking at Feng Wu. "You can save her? Don't make me laugh. Mrs. Ning is dead." "I can bring her back from death itself," said Feng Wu calmly. "You're insane. If you can do that, I'll be your assistant and do everything you say." Feng Wu snorted. "I'll remember that." After that, she went up to Mrs. Ning and examined her with a frown. Ning Chenxi looked like a drowning man grabbing at a straw. Keeping his eyes on Feng Wu, he asked, "What do you think? How is my mother?" Ning Chenxi had never felt so remorseful. He should have let the girl do the job in the first place instead of using young Master Ba. He couldn't think straight now. "If the other medicine refiner hadn't delayed me, I would have had an 80% chance of saving her. But now it's down to 50%. So what do you say? Do you want me to treat her or not?" Feng Wu stared at Ning Chenxi earnestly. "If not, Mrs. Ning will be dead for good in 3 minutes. If you let me do it, none of you are allowed to interfere with my work. So tell me now, do you want me to treat her or not?" "Yes," Ning Chenxi replied before anyone else. "Yes, please. She trusted you the most. I'm sure she'd say the same thing if she was still conscious." Mrs. Yan's lips moved, but she said nothing in the end. If it was up to young Master Ba, they'd be preparing for Mrs. Ning's funeral now. With Feng Wu as their last resort, there might still be some hope. "Which is your priority? Your mother or the babies?" Feng Wu asked another question. Ning Chenxi was elated by the question, for it indicated that she was confident in what she could do. Seeing the look on Feng Wu's face, Ning Chenxi made the choice right away. "If it's possible, please save my mother." Because of the recurring aftershocks, the treatment took place in an open space outside on the lawn. A makeshift tent had been set up using bamboo sticks. Feng Wu turned her stern glance on Mrs. Yen and Yan Yan. Before she said anything, Mrs. Yen took Mrs. Ning's hand and said affirmatively, "I'm not leaving. No matter what you say." They couldn't afford more delays, or Mrs. Ning would really be dead. Feng Wu darted her a cold glance. "You can stay here, but please try not to scream." Mrs. Yen nodded in a hurry. Did she have confidence in Feng Wu? To be honest, not at all. But her head had gone completely blank and she was all numb. Feng Wu got started right away. Taking a first aid kit from Qiuling, she took out a packet of white powder and instructed Qiuling, "This will stop the bleeding. Put half of it over her wounds and let her drink the other half." Yes, Qiuling had been well trained by Feng Wu over the years and she carried out the instructions right away. "My aunt isn't breathing. How can she drink anything?" Yin Yin glared at Feng Wu, finding the latter ridiculous. Was she really going to save Mrs. Ning? Feng Wu was so busy that she didn't even spare a glance for Yin Yin. When Qiuling handed her the water, she tapped Mrs. Ning hard on her chest with her fingers. "How dare you mistreat my aunt's dead body?" Yin Yin cried out in rage. Cough. Just when Yin Yin was going to rush to their side, Mrs. Ning, who had been declared dead, coughed and spat out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 181 You Just Can't Do Anything Right. Chapter 181 You Just Can't Do Anything Right. Had she been brought back from the dead? Only then did Yin Yin notice that 3 golden needles were stuck in Mrs. Ning's chest, still trembling. Mrs. Ning was so weak that her voice was barely audible. She gave Feng Wu a wry smile. "I had this dream that I was dead. I was on this bridge and was going to take the oblivion potion from Mengpa when you woke me up." Mrs. Yen held Mrs. Ning's hand tight and burst into tears. That was exactly what had happened. Young Master Ba had declared her dead a moment ago. Feng Wu said, "Mrs. Ning, you need to save your energy. Please close your eyes and get some rest. I'll take care of everything." Outside, Ning Chenxi and General Wu heard Mrs. Ning's voice, and they thought that it was the most wonderful sound they had ever heard. She had really been brought back from the dead. Young Master Ba's eyes widened in disbelief. That can't be. She wasn't breathing and had no pulse. She was dead. She really was. Meanwhile, Mrs. Ning grabbed Feng Wu's hand and said, "If it's possible, please save my babies. Please promise me." Feng Wu shook her head. "Your babies aren't the only ones I'm going to save. I'm going to save you as well. Please don't worry." After that, Feng Wu slit Mrs. Ning's chest open with her dagger. Whoosh! Blood splashed out all over Yin Yan's face. "You did that on purpose." Yin Yan glared at Feng Wu. She was going to say something when Mrs. Yen covered Yin Yan's mouth and warned the latter with her eyes. Right now, Feng Wu's nimble fingers had reached Mrs. Ning's heart, and a faint green light glowed on her fingertips. That was the healing light particular to medicine refiners. Mrs. Ning's punctured heart grew back as she watched. At the moment, time was of the essence for Feng Wu. Hence, before the ribs fully recovered, Feng Wu sewed Mrs. Ning back up, and the entire process took less than a minute. "Is that all?" Mrs. Yen frowned at Feng Wu. All she saw was Feng Wu moving her hands around inside Mrs. Ning's chest, and before Mrs. Yen could see anything clearly, it was over. Feng Wu didn't answer her. The dagger in her hand was aimed at Mrs. Ning's bulging belly now. "What do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Yen cried out. Was this girl trying to kill someone? Feng Wu ignored her. She slid the thin blade across Mrs. Ning's belly and made a small cut before handing the dagger to Qiuling. She then stuck her hands into Mrs. Ning's belly. Yin Yin was shocked. That was so brutal. She couldn't take it anymore and turned around to throw up. Mrs. Yen kept her unblinking gaze on Feng Wu. Was she going to take the baby out just like that? She must have lost her mind. Mrs. Yen had guessed right. The next second, Feng Wu took out a chubby male baby with both hands. She glanced at Mrs. Yen and said, "The baby basket." Oh right, Mrs. Yen's head had gone blank at all the things Feng Wu was doing. Only then did she come back to herself and take out the baby basket they had prepared. The baby with purplish skin was then put inside. But why isn't he crying? Mrs. Yen put a finger to the baby's nose, but didn't feel any breathing. Shocked, she felt the baby's pulse. There was none either. He's dead. It's a stillborn. Frightened, Mrs. Yen lost her balance and nearly dropped the baby. She just couldn't do anything right. Taking a deep breath, Feng Wu cast a stern look at Mrs. Yen. "Drop him and you'll really have a dead baby." Chapter 182 Is she that good a doctor? Chapter 182. Is she that good a doctor? Keeping her eyes on Mrs. Yen, Feng Wu went back to working on Mrs. Ning, and soon took the other baby out of Mrs. Ning's belly. Mrs. Yen had been following Feng Wu with her eyes, and she cried out when she saw the baby in Feng Wu's hands. There really is a baby girl. It's true. And the umbilical cord is around her neck. The girl had barely felt her sister's pulse before reaching that conclusion. So far, everything was turning out just as the girl said. Could all that be ascribed to coincidence alone? After putting the baby girl, who was the size of a kitten, into the baby basket, Feng Wu quickly sutured the wound on Mrs. Ning's belly. Neither of the babies are crying, having been scared stiff by Mrs. Ning's condition first and petrified by Feng Wu's treatment methods afterward. Mrs. Yen could no longer think straight. She turned to Feng Wu with pleading eyes. What are we going to do now? The babies. Even Mrs. Yen herself didn't realize that she had grown to trust Feng Wu a lot. Feng Wu took out 5 golden needles, and in a split second they were all in the baby girl. There was 1 needle each in the baby's head, throat, heart, stomach and navel. Then with a wave of Feng Wu's hand, all 5 needles began to vibrate. The next second, "Wah!" the baby girl wailed. It was just that she was very weak to begin with, so her wails were more like the hums of a kitten. Feng Wu then took the baby boy from Mrs. Yen, and with the help of 2 golden needles, the baby began to cry loudly as well. "My children, my babies." Mrs. Ning's hands reached out to Feng Wu. Taking the 2 babies to Mrs. Ning, Feng Wu let out a breath of relief and smiled. "I'm glad that I didn't disappoint you, Mrs. Ning. Both of your babies have come through." "That's impossible." When young Master Ba heard the baby's cries, he was dumbfounded. How could that have happened? He didn't understand. When young Master Ba rushed into the tent, he went straight to Mrs. Ning. Seeing the weak but conscious Mrs. Ning and the crying babies, young Master Ba felt that his head had gone blank. With a bewildered look on his face, he felt Mrs. Ning's pulse. The ribs are fixed, the punctured heart is repaired, the bleeding has stopped, and the 2 babies were successfully delivered. Young Master Ba stared at Feng Wu, as if he had seen a ghost. "That's impossible. Even my grandfather couldn't have done it. Who on earth are you?" Mrs. Yen and Yin Yen also stared at Feng Wu in amazement. Who was this girl? Outside, Feng Yiran and Feng Lu stood there dazed when they heard the news. That can't be. How can she? Is she really that good a doctor? Feng Lu clenched her fists, disbelief written all over her face. She would never admit that Feng Wu was an expert in medicine. Feng Yiran frowned as well. I heard that she had had a few precious pills with her back then. That's it. Feng Lu jumped at the first excuse she could find to deceive herself. She smirked. No wonder she could cure Mrs. Ning. It was all thanks to those pills. She did nothing herself. Feng Yiran nodded but wasn't fully convinced. Just then there was a rumble and the ground shook violently. Feng Wu's face darkened right away and she rushed out of the tent. She knew something like this was going to happen. As they watched, the houses in Wanping town collapsed one after another. Chapter 183 Her Name. Chapter 183 Her Name. As the houses crumbled, screams filled the air. Judging by the sounds, one could imagine how many people must have been buried by the earthquake. We need to help them. Where is everyone? Feng Wu cried out. General Wu rubbed his forehead. The wave of magical beasts is trying to break into the town and we're in grave danger. All the soldiers are guarding the gate now. We don't have any spare hands now to help the people. Ning Chenxi immediately instructed his guards to help the townsfolk dig the others out from under the ruins. However, those they saved were all covered in injuries and were barely breathing. It seemed that they were going to lose them after all. The head of the town watched this in distress. All the medicine refiners in town were assigned to the gate to treat the soldiers in need. The people here. Everyone despaired at the current situation. They had ferocious magical beasts outside the gate. And the aftershocks from the earthquake kept coming. Numerous soldiers and civilians were injured, and they had neither enough medicine refiners nor the adequate medicine. Was Wanping town going to be destroyed today? Have you sent people out for help? While everyone else was on edge, Feng Wu remained level-headed and composed. We've sent several groups out already, but because of the magical beasts out there, they were all killed. General Wu clenched his fists, his eyes bloodshot red. The authorities still have no idea of the level of casualties we've suffered here. If we can deliver the message to Omping City, we'll be able to get some reinforcements. I'll go. Ning Chenxi rose to his feet. No. General Wu rejected that right away. Why? Young Master Ning, it's not for someone of your noble status to undertake. The chance of dying is too great for you to take that risk. I'm the son of the governor. That's exactly why I should go. Everyone here will be killed if I don't. But if I go, there's still a chance for us. Moreover, the mayor of Omping City knows me. I'm the most suitable candidate for the job. General Wu was rendered speechless. Ning Chenxi turned to Feng Wu. Thank you for saving my mother. I'll thank you properly after I get back. After that, Ning Chenxi turned to leave. Wait. Feng Wu stopped Ning Chenxi and tossed him a bottle of repellent when he turned around. She said calmly, that's some repellent. I can't promise that it'll keep you absolutely safe, but it'll buy you some time. Repellent. That was a very precious potion. Especially when so many magical beasts were laying siege to the city. A potion like that could save lives. Ning Chenxi looked at Feng Wu with tears in his eyes. Aye. Feng Wu nodded at him, then turned round and busied herself with helping the wounded. When Ning Chenxi came out of his sentimental mood, the girl was nowhere to be seen. Ning Chenxi frowned. He might not survive this trip, but he still hadn't found out his beloved girl's name. He didn't want to die with such regrets. He spotted Feng Yiran a few steps away and his eyes lit up. If he was guessing right, the guy was connected to the girl somehow. So, her name is? Ning Chenxi asked. Feng Lu had been observing them on the side this whole time, and naturally, she knew who Ning Chenxi was asking about. She would be lying if she said that she wasn't jealous. Feng Wu had saved both Mrs. Ning and her babies. And it was obvious that Ning Chenxi had a thing for her. Hence, before Feng Yiran could reply, Feng Lu blurted out without a second thought, Feng Lu. Chapter 184 Her name is Feng Lu. Chapter 184. Her name is Feng Lu. Ning Chenxi frowned. Her name is Feng Lu. Once the hardest part was over, Feng Lu had no problem sticking to her lie. She's Feng Lu, the sixth daughter of the Feng family in the imperial capital. Thank you. Ning Chenxi cupped his fists at Feng Lu, then turned around and left. Feng Lu, what a nice name. After this was over, he would ask his mother to propose a marriage to her family. Ning Chenxi grinned. Once Ning Chenxi was out of sight, Feng Yiran's face darkened. Feng Yiran glowered at Feng Lu. Who are you trying to fool with such a lousy lie? How long do you think you can fool him for? As long as it takes. The Ning family will have to come to me if they want to thank Feng Wu later. And I'll just turn them down. I'm not going to let Feng Wu take the credit. Feng Lu said carelessly. Feng Yiran didn't know what to say to that. Completely absorbed in saving the wounded, Feng Wu had no idea that Feng Lu had taken the credit in her place. Standing on top of the city wall, Ning Chenxi downed the repellent potion. The next second, he jumped into the densely packed horde of magical beasts. As he ran past them for a split second, the beasts forgot about attacking him. And that one moment was all Ning Chenxi needed. Whoosh! 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 Ning Chenxi ran at his top speed and wove through the crowd despite the great danger. Once they began to realize what was going on, the magical beasts chased him frantically while Ning Chenxi rode off as fast as he could on horseback. As he fled past numerous old trees, the magical beasts kept getting closer and closer. They were almost on him. At that critical moment, why Bosch Jun, you were right. There really is a wave of magical beasts. If Feng Wu was here, she would recognize that voice right away. It belonged to none other than Feng Sun, the young lord of the Feng family, himself. High up on a mountain slope, Feng Sun, Xianyi and Jun Linyuan were sitting on horses as they watched the person gallop off on horseback with all the beasts chasing him. Feng Sun chuckled. This must be the worst day of that guy's life. Look at all those magical beasts. If I'm guessing right, he'll be surrounded in less than a minute. Jun Linyuan darted a casual look at Feng Sun. It's time for you to save him now. Feng Sun rubbed his nose. Boss Jun, I can't fight all those magical beasts down there. It'll be too risky. I don't want to get myself killed to save him. You'll regret it, said Jun Linyuan indifferently. Regret? Why? Wait, why does that guy look so familiar? Feng Sun craned his neck. Xianyi frowned a little. He looks familiar to me too. Shit. Feng Sun cried out when the teenager was close enough. No wonder he found the guy familiar. It was his cousin, whom he had met just a while ago. No wonder Boss Jun told him to save the guy before he regretted it. Chenxi. Ning Chenxi. Feng Sun dashed off on horseback down the mountain slope. Ning Chenxi was overwhelmed with consternation at that moment. Who wouldn't be? Chased by so many magical beasts. The closer the beasts got, the more perturbed he became. Ning Chenxi found that familiar voice the most pleasant sound he had ever heard. Was despair giving him hallucinations now? Chapter 185 She's the only girl I'll marry. Chapter 185. She's the only girl I'll marry. Ning Chenxi. Feng Sun got to him in no time. What are you thinking messing with so many magical beasts? Are you trying to get yourself killed? Ning Chenxi looked to his right and saw a familiar figure rushing toward him. Ah! Ning Chenxi almost burst into excited tears. Cousin! Cousin Feng! Help! Ah! Heaven hadn't forsaken him after all. Ning Chenxi had been wondering if Feng Sun and the others could still be in Omping City when they showed up in front of him. Since Feng Sun had run out to help, Xianyi couldn't sit by and watch. Seeing the hard battle down below, Jun Linyuan grew impatient. Somehow he felt a little restless. Right away his fingers moved, making a complicated pattern. The next moment, rumble! Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Numerous streaks of lightning fell like a downpour and struck the magical beasts. The rampaging wave of magical beasts that had been so sure of themselves a moment ago was instantly cut down by a third. That successfully baffled the beasts. They looked up involuntarily at the teenager in the black robe up on the mountain slope. Crushing thunderbolt. Another one of Jun Linyuan's killing stances followed. Rumble. Countless streaks of lightning filled the space between heaven and earth like silver snakes. All the magical beasts looked terrified. This was too much. They turned around and fled at once. Apart from the charred bodies on the ground, there were no magical beasts in sight. Ning Chenxi watched this in astonishment. The same wave of magical beasts that had almost killed him several times over had been taken care of by His Royal Highness with just 2 stances. They were teenagers of the same age. How big a disparity could there be? Seeing the baffled look on Ning Chenxi's face, Feng Sun patted him on the shoulder. Dummy, stop gawking and be polite. Boss Jun. Jun Linyuan waved him off. What happened? Seeing that Jun Linyuan was addressing him directly, Ning Chenxi was over the moon. The more excited he was, the faster he talked. In less than 2 minutes he told them everything. The girl that saved your mother. Her name is Feng Lu. Ning Chenxi said in exhilaration. Brothers. I found my dream girl. At that thought, Ning Chenxi was suddenly on the alert. Feng Lu is mine. Brothers, she's off limits now. Feng Sun stuck a finger in his ear, took it out, then asked in a strange voice, what did you say? Her name was? I've got it all figured out. Her name is Feng Lu and she's the 6th daughter of the Feng family in the imperial capital. Ning Chenxi couldn't control his excited voice. She's beautiful, kind, elegant, level-headed and wise. I've never met a girl so perfect. Feng Lu. Feng Sun looked up and gave Xianyi and Jun Linyuan a strange look in turn. In the end he stared at Ning Chenxi and asked tentatively, are you sure the girl you're talking about is called Feng Lu? That's right. The 6th daughter of the Feng family. Ning Chenxi's fair cheeks flushed in excitement. Once we're settled back at home, I'll ask my mother to propose a marriage to the Feng family. Propose a marriage? Feng Sun thought his eyeballs were going to fall out. Yes. Ning Chenxi clenched his fists. Feng Lu is my dream girl and she's the only one I want to marry. Jun Linyuan said, what is said can't be retracted. Chapter 186 Oh God. Chapter 186. Oh God. Feng Sun darted a bemused look at June Linyuan. Boss June had never given a damn about anyone or anything. Why was he suddenly in the mood to tease Ning Chenxi now? But Feng Sun didn't give it much thought, for he was busy persuading Ning Chenxi at the moment. Ning Chenxi, have you gone bonkers? You'll marry no one but Feng Lu? Do you even know what kind of girl she is? What are you thinking? Frowning, Feng Sun found Ning Chenxi's decision unbelievable. Feng Lu is the worst. She's snobbish, unkind, arrogant and vicious. Ning Chenxi, who had looked rather shy only a moment ago, jumped to his feet at those words and glared at Feng Sun. Cousin, how can you say such things about her behind her back? I guarantee you that Feng Lu is nothing like that. I've seen it with my own eyes. She's the best. That almost gave Feng Sun a heart attack. Jabbing Ning Chenxi in the head with a finger, he said, Are you blind or something? You've seen it with your own eyes? Feng Lu is the sixth daughter of the Feng family, and used to run after Feng Wu. But once Feng Wu was crippled, not only did Feng Lu twist the knife, she even tried to kill Feng Wu. You call someone that evil the best? Are you nuts? Cousin. Ning Chenxi's eyes were bloodshot red as he said solemnly, I respect you as a cousin. But if you say one more bad thing about Feng Lu, you won't be my buddy anymore. You. Feng Sun was so frustrated that he felt like choking his idiotic young cousin. You've lost your mind. I haven't. She's the best. She is. No one can say anything bad about her when I'm around. I'm going to marry her and no one can stop me. Cousin, even if you can't offer me your blessing, the least you can do is respect my decision. Ning Chenxi said with a straight face. Feng Sun fumed like an erupting volcano. June Linyuan darted a nonchalant glance at Feng Sun. Mind your own business. Feng Sun was vexed to begin with, and June Linyuan's comment nearly made him choke on his own breath. Glaring at Ning Chenxi, Feng Sun said, Fine, fine. I stuck my nose into your business. You want to marry Feng Lu? Marry away. Go ahead. I'll wait to see how long it'll take you to regret it. Ning Chenxi glowered at Feng Sun. We'll be very happy together. Feng Sun waved him off. Aren't you supposed to be getting reinforcements from Amping City? Go now. But cousin, with you guys here, what other reinforcements do I need? I don't want to see you now. Get lost. Feng Sun kicked Ning Chenxi in the butt. Ning Chenxi jumped onto his horse and promptly set out, yelling over his shoulder, Cousin, you guys go help the people of Wanping Town first. My mum and Feng Lulu are both there. Promise me you'll keep them safe for me. Feng Lulu? I'm gonna throw up. Feng Sun swore he was getting a headache as he watched Ning Chenxi dash off. Turning around, he asked his buddies, Tell me now, is it me? Or there's really something seriously wrong with him? June Linyuan darted Feng Sun a glance without saying anything. He then flicked the reins and dashed off first on his snowy white horse. Concerned about the current situation in Wanping Town, Feng Sun pulled the reins on his horse and charged out after June Linyuan. An idea suddenly struck him and his stomach lurched. Oh God! Xianyi gave Feng Sun a bewildered look. Why are you so jumpy today? If Feng Lu is in Wanping Town, what about Feng Wu? We tricked her brother and sent him to the imperial capital in secret. Feng Wu will definitely go after him, and she's very likely traveling with Feng Lu. So, June Linyuan asked unhurriedly. Chapter 187 Razed to the Ground. Chapter 187 Razed to the Ground. So, Feng Sun scratched his head. What are we gonna do? If we run into Feng Wu? The faintest smile emerged on June Linyuan's well-sculpted face. Are you afraid of her? Feng Sun said grumpily. We abducted her brother, for heaven's sake. And we did it behind her back. I bet she can't wait to strangle me. He pulled his neck in as he said that. Xianyi gave Feng Sun a look. Young Lord Feng, are you frightened of a girl? You don't understand. Feng Sun glared at Xianyi. When Feng Wu stares at you with her big black eyes without saying a word, don't you feel terrified? Xianyi rubbed his chin and gave June Linyuan a glance, then said, That's called an aura. Same as Boss June. Feng Wu's gaze was sharper than a cold blade that threatened to kill any stranger who came too close without permission. Feng Sun nodded immediately. That's so true. Anyway, my stomach turns whenever Feng Wu looks at me like that. We abducted his brother? Jun Linyuan looked casually in Feng Sun's direction. Puckering up his face, Feng Sun said, it was all me. I came up with the idea. Gosh, will Feng Wu kill me when she sees me next time? Jun Linyuan gave him the slightest smile and murmured, if she owes you her life. That immediately cheered Feng Sun up. That's right. Exactly. She won't do anything to me if I save her life. Let's go now. I have to save her this time. I'll go first. Jun Linyuan was unbelievably fast. He was out of sight almost immediately after that. Boss Jun is so nice to me. Feng Sun mumbled gratefully as he watched Jun Linyuan turn into a tiny black dot on the horizon. Xianyi gave him a questioning look. Feng Sun was so touched and his tone was full of emotion. Boss Jun hurried off just to help me make Feng Wu owe me her life. He would never try to save anyone if it wasn't for me, not to mention that he doesn't even like Feng Wu. Sigh. I owe Boss Jun so much. A suspicious look flickered in Xianyi's brooding eyes. But Feng Sun looked at him in bewilderment. Rubbing his nose, Xianyi shook his head with a wry smile on his face. Somehow, he was understanding the whole thing differently from Feng Sun. But was he supposed to believe that Boss Jun actually cared about Feng Wu? Xianyi shook his head. There was no way that Boss Jun would go for a useless girl like that. As they rushed toward Wanping Town, the town itself was surrounded on all sides by magical beasts. Although Ning Chenxi had lured away some of the magical beasts, more were coming out of the mountains in endless waves. Hence, Wanping Town had been under constant attack this whole time. The town might be able to hold on for a while if it was only attacked by land beasts outside the gate. However, magical beasts were coming down from the sky as well. Thud, thud, thud. There were magical eagles, bats, and all kinds of other birds. Countless flying beasts batted their wings, covering the sky as they attacked the town with their abilities. Crack, 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 thump, thump, thump. Streaks of lightning flashed in the air, lighting up the sky as if it was daytime. The look on General Wu's face was very grim. Because of its strategic importance, not only were there many soldiers stationed at Wanping Town, a defense formation had been set up in the town as well. However, if the attack from the flying magical beasts continued, that formation wouldn't be able to last much longer. If that happened, the entire Wanping Town would be razed to the ground. What to do? Everyone looked extremely anxious. Chapter 188 Get them out of here. Chapter 188 Get them out of here. Everyone looked extremely anxious. If the town was breached, no one here would survive the day. Because of the earthquake, more than half the houses in Wanping Town had collapsed. Fortunately, most of the villagers had run out in time, and only some of them had been buried under the ruins. The people of Wanping Town were used to such situations. The young and the strong were sent to the gate tower to help with defense, and the middle-aged men began to dig for those buried under the collapsed houses, while the women and children took care of the wounded. All the sick and wounded were taken to a spacious makeshift army tent. Jiang Yuan was a mid-level medicine refiner and a medical officer who had been stationed in Wanping Town for a while. Right now, as he led a team of junior medicine refiners, he was busy saving lives. He looked pained as he watched all the wounded being taken out of the ruins. We still have so many wounded soldiers to treat out there on the city walls. With all the wounded civilians here, how are we going to treat everyone in time? Jiang Yuan was worried sick as he looked around the tent, disconsolate. Dr. Jiang, I say we focus on the soldiers first, Li, a junior medicine refiner working under Jiang Yuan, whispered in his ear. We need to set our priorities. We'll be safe here if they can guard the gate. Otherwise, we'll all be dead. If that happens, all these people that we save here will still die in the end. So how about we? Young Master Ba is out there at the gate. I'm sure he's more than capable of helping the soldiers. Since he sent us here, the most important thing for us now is to treat the townspeople. Moreover, these people have been living here in Wanping Town for generations and help guard the border. They're the real unsung heroes. Dr. Li said in a low voice. I saw young Master Ba rushing toward the gate angrily just then. I wonder what happened. Jiang Yuan snapped, "Save your spit. Get on with helping the patients already." The common folk of Wanping Town were indeed well trained. The team consisted of middle-aged men who stayed silent and composed. None of them uttered any unnecessary words even when those buried were their next of kin. They only fought back their tears and carried the wounded toward the army tent. Wait, Dr. Li looked at the severely wounded townsfolk and was going to start treating them when he saw that all those lying on stretchers had notes stuck to their chests. Picking up the notes, Dr. Li read in a low voice, "Intracranial hemorrhage, stopped with a silver needle. Ruptured spleen repaired, needs immediate suture. Torn ankle tendon and comminuted fracture, already treated, only needs recovery ointment." Dr. Li laughed as he read on. Is this supposed to be a joke? How can anyone stop an intracranial hemorrhage like that? And no one can repair a ruptured spleen without opening up the patient. And that ankle, that requires an amputation. This is ridiculous. It's interfering with our normal procedures. Zhao Qian. Dr. Li scolded the leader of the middle-aged team doing the digging. Who on earth did this? This is monkey business. Whoever did this, get them out of here. Is it monkey business? Zhao Qian looked troubled. He had seen with his own eyes that with a wave of her hand and a flicker of golden needles, that beautiful young lady straightaway stopped Zhao Wu from bleeding out. And it wasn't just Zhao Wu. It was the same with Zhao Lu, Zhao Qi, Zhao Ba. Of course it is. We're working our asses off here, and someone is still trying to make fun of us. That's just abominable. Dr. Li reprimanded loudly. Chapter 189. No one died. Chapter 189. No one died. Just then the look on Jiang Yuan's face changed a little. Staring at Zhao Wu, he told Zhao Qian, "Put Zhao Wu down on the bunk. Quickly." Yes. Zhao Qian did as told right away. Dr. Jiang. Dr. Li looked at Jiang Yuan in confusion, but the latter was closely examining Zhao Wu, who was still unconscious. Taking Zhao Wu's wrist, Jiang Yuan felt his pulse carefully. The look on Jiang Yuan's face turned ineffable when he realized what he was looking at. To avoid making any possible mistakes, Jiang Yuan took out some specific medical tools and ran a more thorough examination. He then drew in his breath. He wouldn't have been as surprised if Zhao Wu was the only case. But after him, everyone that was carried in all had notes stuck to their chests, which stated their injuries, what treatment they had been given, and what procedures should be carried out from there on. This. Dr. Li looked at Jiang Yuan in bewilderment. Captain Jiang, this. All the other junior medicine refiners were all staring at Jiang Yuan in disbelief. They knew that there were amazing medicine refiners out there, but they never expected one to be this good. With an operation like this, they had expected to be all over the place working their asses off. And usually it would take them at least 2 hours to treat one patient. Usually. However, now that the mysterious medicine refiner was on the team, all they needed to do was follow the instructions on the notes, and they were able to finish up with a patient in under 15 minutes. The increase in efficiency was unbelievable. Before they knew it, they had gone through almost all of the hundreds of patients in the tent. Jiang Yuan grabbed Zhao Qian right away. Where is this person? Take me to them. Naturally, Zhao Qian had no objections to that. He took Jiang Yuan to that amazing young lady. Despite having prepared himself for what he might find, when Jiang Yuan learned that the remarkable medicine refiner was a young woman, he was still baffled when he saw Feng Wu. Was it you? Were you the one who saved all those townsfolk back there? Jiang Yuan found Feng Wu at the wall. Feng Wu was crouching down and sewing the severed hand back onto the arm of a teenager. You, seeing that Feng Wu was calmly reconnecting a hand to an arm, Jiang Yuan's eyes widened. Will that work? Can it be sewed back on just like that? If he hadn't seen those precise instructions on the notes and the excellent treatment methods for himself, Jiang Yuan would never believe that one could reattach a severed limb with catgut alone. Feng Wu darted a glance at him. Knowing that Jiang Yuan had been completely convinced by Feng Wu's medical skills, Zhao Qian made the introduction immediately. This is Dr. Jiang Yuan. Dr. Jiang here is in charge of treating all the wounded folk. You're a mid-level medicine refiner? Feng Wu asked casually. Yes. And may I ask what your level is? Jiang Yuan had his conjecture about the level of the young medicine refiner here. According to Jiang Yuan's original estimates, at least 200 out of those 300 wounded townsfolk would have died while being treated. However, after the initial treatment by the young woman here, all of them survived. None of them died. It was beyond imagination. But that was exactly what had happened. Jiang Yuan did the comparisons in his head. Even young Master Ba himself might be outshone by this young lady here. No, young Master Ba definitely wouldn't be able to achieve something like this. For if he could, given his personality, he would have done it already. Feng Wu darted a confused look at Jiang Yuan. Dr. Jiang. Chapter 190 Astounded. Chapter 190. Astounded. Dr. Jiang. Feng Wu called his name again. What? Oh, Jiang Yuan came back to himself. Looking at Feng Wu, he asked, "May I call you Miss Feng?" Feng Wu gave him a nod. Even when she wasn't looking, her hands were still sewing steadily. "Miss Feng, what medicine refiner level are you?" Jiang Yuan sounded bewildered. As much as he trusted this Miss Feng's capability, she still looked too young to be. The medicine refiner level? Feng Wu shook her head. "I've never taken a test, so I don't know for sure." Although it was very likely that she had reached the Grandmaster level, Feng Wu added in her head. Dr. Jiang fell silent. So, Jiang Yuan couldn't help but ask, "After you sew the hand back on, he can use it? As good as new? What else? Do you think I'm doing this for fun?" Feng Wu rolled her eyes at Jiang Yuan. "You finish this up." To be honest, Feng Wu had the natural prestige of an august leader when she turned serious. Jiang Yuan was the most superior medicine refiner after young Master Ba, and a commanding figure here in Wanping town. However, he obeyed Feng Wu as soon as her stern gaze turned his way. It just came so naturally. He took over the job and Feng Wu gave him the instructions. Make sure you seal off his Tsuza acupoint first when you do the suture. The spiritual essence should go into the Tianquan acupoint through the needle, and out through Tsuza after flushing his meridians. Jiang Yuan did as told. He only realized after making 5 stitches that he was here to investigate this mysterious medicine refiner. Yet he was doing her bidding now. This wasn't like him at all. Jiang Yuan wasn't the only one feeling that way. His junior medicine refiners were also eyeing one another in bewilderment. Since he had started, Jiang Yuan thought that he might as well stick to it to the end. Sparing Jiang Yuan a fraction of her attention, Feng Wu focused on the rest of the other wounded soldiers. The soldiers had severed limbs, crushed chests, or ruptured abdomens. Some were even suffering head wounds from the flying magical beasts. There was blood everywhere. After Jiang Yuan finally finished sewing up that hand, he examined the patient closely. What he found astounded him. What? The meridians in the entire arm were working. Anyone could sew a severed limb back on like putting 2 pieces of cloth together. The flesh could be put back together easily, but the problem was with the meridians. That had always been an unsolved problem until now. Jiang Yuan's eyes widened in disbelief. He still couldn't believe his eyes. Holding the arm tentatively and almost wrapping himself around the soldier, he examined it again. This is real. This is happening. It's really been reattached. And the meridians are all working. If everything goes as planned, the arm will be as good as new once the wound is healed. OMG. Jiang Yuan then gave Feng Wu another look in bewilderment. However, what he saw astounded him further. While he was sewing up the arm of that wounded man, the young Miss Feng had finished treating a row of wounded soldiers. Seeing the bemused look in Jiang Yuan's eyes, Dr. Li nodded. "Captain, while you were helping that one, Miss Feng treated 20 already." Chapter 191. How is that even possible? Chapter 191. How is that even possible? Jiang Yuan was speechless. Because of how few medicine refiners there were, each individual was as precious as the next one. As a result, Jiang Yuan used to think highly of himself and consider himself some sort of genius. However, now that he had witnessed Miss Feng's skills, he realized how short-sighted he had been. She gave me detailed instructions. Watching Feng Wu busy herself among the wounded, Jiang Yuan said in amazement, That was a very high-level skill, and she taught me without holding anything back. How generous and magnanimous of her. I feel so ashamed of myself. I don't deserve her grace. He had been stuck at the intermediate level for ages because he had no access to advanced medicine refining scriptures, which had stopped him from learning more advanced medicine refining skills. Although Miss Feng only talked to him briefly just then, what she said would benefit him greatly. Wait! Zhang Yuan cried out all of a sudden. The notes! Do we still have those notes? Dr. Li nodded. Yes, we do. We need them for the follow-up treatments, so we kept them. Give them to me. All of them. Zhang Yuan dug the notes out of the pockets of the other medicine refiners and stuffed them all into his chest pocket. In those notes were the most efficient and effective ways to treat wounds. After this was over, he was going to study them carefully and memorize each word until they became his own. Feng Wu had been keeping an eye on Dr. Jiang and saw everything he did. Because of that, she was impressed by the guy. People who worked hard in their field would leave a good impression on others, and that was what Feng Wu saw in Dr. Jiang. Zhang Yuan, Feng Wu called his name. Yes. Zhang Yuan ran to her side with a smile. Miss Feng, what do you need? Can I help you in any way? Feng Wu glanced at him and casually said, the civilians back there weren't wounded in the same way as the soldiers. You won't get enough case studies from those notes alone. Miss Feng? Zhang Yuan looked flustered, not expecting Miss Feng to notice his secret attempt. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to steal from you. It's just that. Feng Wu gave him a bewildered look. What do you mean by steal? What's wrong with studying them openly? Zhang Yuan was pleasantly surprised. Miss Feng, do you mean that I can study those notes? Really? The look on Feng Wu's face was very innocent. You won't be able to study those. They're way too advanced for you. If you want to learn, start with advanced medical skills. After that, Feng Wu pointed at the patient she was treating. This one here has been bitten by a sharp-fanged leopard. The leopard's fangs are venomous, and in advanced medicine refiners' common practice is too. Zhang Yuan was dazed. So, instead of criticizing him for learning from her without permission, Miss Feng was teaching him during the actual treatment, combining theory with practice. She was able to name all kinds of skills precisely without pausing to reflect. Exactly what level was she at? An advanced medicine refiner? Definitely not. Was she a master? Or a grandmaster? Even if Miss Feng started learning medicine refinement right after she was born, she would have had less than 20 years of practice. How was that even possible? Chapter 192 Unable to face Feng Wu. Chapter 192. Unable to face Feng Wu. Feng Wu said impatiently, Did you get that? Why, yes. Start working then. I'll only explain once with each case. As for how much you can remember, that'll depend on your talent and intelligence, said Feng Wu. All these soldiers of Wanping Town will be relying heavily on you. So I hope you will learn as much as you can. So that was why. Zhang Yuan finally understood why Miss Feng was teaching him all these effective methods without holding anything back. She was counting on him to save more soldiers in the future. You're teaching me all these advanced skills just because of that. Feng Wu gave Zhang Yuan a bemused look. Advanced skills? Where did you get that idea from? These are just some very basic ones. Why should I keep them from anyone? If you want, teach them to as many people as you want. Share the knowledge. Feng Wu had never not been able to level up her refining skills because she lacked the skill. That was because she had her beautiful master, who was the best in the whole continent. Maybe her beautiful master was a man of foresight, for during Feng Wu's full and laborious childhood days, one of her tasks had been to memorize all sorts of medicine refining skills. The little Feng Wu had only been an intermediate medicine refiner back then, but her master had required her to remember everything from the advanced and master levels to the grandmaster level. Feng Wu couldn't begin to describe how hard a time it had given her. However, she only realized now what a great favor her master had done her. At the thought of her master, Feng Wu couldn't help but clench her fists. She had to reach the spiritual grandmaster stage ASAP. Only then would little Phoenix tell her how to save her master. Just then, Dr. Jiang looked up and spotted young Master Ba. He called out to the latter right away. Dr. Ba, Dr. Ba. Dr. Ba turned the other way as soon as he saw Feng Wu. The incident with Mrs. Ning was still fresh in his mind, and he was too abashed to face the lady now. Dr. Jiang knew nothing about that though. Seeing that General Wu was with Dr. Ba, he ran up to them and dragged Dr. Ba to Feng Wu in excitement. Dr. Ba, look. We've hit the jackpot. Miss Feng here is unbelievable. With her here, we've saved all 300 wounded townspeople. There have been no deaths. And look at our soldiers here. They've all been saved too. Here, look at their arms and legs. Before, they would have been crippled. But after Miss Feng sewed them up her way, they'll be back to normal once the wounds heal. Young Master Ba was unable to face Feng Wu. As soon as he recalled what he had done just then when he pushed Feng Wu away and ridiculed her, he couldn't stop flushing. And he would still get jittery at the thought of almost killing Mrs. Ning together with her 2 babies. By now, young Master Ba didn't dare demean Feng Wu's medical skills anymore. Dr. Jiang knew nothing about what had happened between young Master Ba and Feng Wu. He was only doing this to make sure that Feng Wu got all the respect she deserved. General Wu looked around at all the wounded soldiers, pleasantly surprised. Really? They won't be incapacitated after they recover from their wounds? No, they won't. Their meridians are working fine, so there won't be any problems at all. That's great. General Wu said to Feng Wu in excitement. I'll definitely cite you for your meritorious service. Chapter 193 One More Hope. Chapter 193 One More Hope. Just then the ground shook violently. Plop, plop. All light was blocked out and the sky turned dark as night. What's going on? What happened? What is this? There were surprised cries everywhere. Feng Wu looked up at the sky. The protective formation overhead was buzzing under the attack of numerous blood bats, which were hurtling themselves continuously at the protective shield. Feng Wu frowned a little. Those black, squishy blood bats were pretty much her beautiful mother's least favorite creatures. If she saw them, she would have nightmares for days. At that thought, Feng Wu was going to say something when General Wu cried out, "Oh no! They've almost breached the protective formation. If the shield breaks, thousands of flying magical beasts will get in and all of Wanping Town will be pulverized." Feng Wu threw a dirty look at General Wu. Guard the formation then. General Wu looked very grim. He would have shouted back if any other person talked to him that way. But Miss Feng here was an amazing medicine refiner, the most amazing one he had ever met. He would never dare to lose his temper with her. He had no choice but to give her a wry smile. The formation has already been severely damaged. Bailey, our formation master, informed me that we can hold on for another 3 minutes at most. 3 minutes. Before General Wu could say another word, Yin Yin cried out. She was here to ask General Wu about the situation. Given the circumstances, everyone was worried about their own lives. Seeing that it was the daughter of the Yin family, General Wu cursed inwardly, but he still managed to reply politely. Miss Yin. Yin Yin waved him off. General Wu, just tell me. What did you mean by 3 minutes? She acted as if General Wu had to take orders from her, and her manner was very condescending. General Wu frowned, but still told her the truth. The formation will break in 3 minutes. We'll lose the protective shield and all the flying magical beasts will get in. The beasts outside will take this opportunity to breach the gate and wheel. Are you telling me that we'll die? Yin Yin glared at General Wu. Do you mean that after getting myself out of Death Valley? I'm still going to die. General Wu corrected her in a solemn voice. We are all going to die. What are we gonna do? Yin Yin glowered. General Wu had narrowly escaped death more than once and he remained as composed as ever. The only hope we have is that young Master Ning can come back with reinforcements before the formation breaks. Or everyone would die. Are you kidding me? Yin Yin yelled. My cousin left less than an hour ago and he's probably not in Omping City yet. How can he arrive with reinforcements in less than 3 minutes? There is one more hope, but it's even slimmer than the first. Which is, a capable formation master will step out from among us, just like our mysterious genius medicine refiner Miss Feng here, and that person will repair the formation and keep it going until reinforcements arrive. General Wu, do you even believe it yourself? Medicine refiners might be rare on this continent, but at least we've all met them. But a formation master? There are less than 1/10 of them compared with medicine refiners. Where on earth are we going to find a mysterious formation master now? Not to mention that we need a rather advanced one. Chapter 194. Are you nuts? Stop. Chapter 194. Are you nuts? Stop. Everyone fell silent at Yin Yan's words. She was right. Formation masters were so rare that one wouldn't just pop up on short notice. General Wu looked distressed. We do have our own formation masters stationed here in Wanping Town. After all, this protective formation requires its spiritual crystals to be replenished as well as routine maintenance. The Guild of Formation Masters sent some spiritual masters over to help us with that. Stop nagging then. Yin Yin glowered at General Wu. Just then, footsteps hurriedly approached them and someone called out, General, we're in trouble. The Essence Gathering Tower is going to collapse. Master Lin said he can't hold it up for much longer. We only have a minute left. One last minute. They didn't even have 3 minutes now, and the end was going to arrive in a minute's time. Trepidation and bewilderment overwhelmed everyone. Were they going to die just like that? What would it be like to be dead? They would be buried under the dirt and worms would crawl all over their rotting corpses. They would never see the blue sky, breathe the fresh air, eat nice food, or see their loved ones ever again. That thought almost drove Yin Yin insane. The look on Feng Wu's face turned grave. The Essence Gathering Tower was located by the gate, and she had glanced at it in passing on her way in. She never expected that it would be destroyed so soon. If she had a choice, Feng Wu didn't want to expose herself as a formation master. Back when her master was still around, he had told her that she could keep this ability a secret and use it as her trump card. For once the formation skill was used in actual combat, one's capability would be amplified significantly, to the point of giving an opponent a critical hit or even delivering a coup de grace. However, the magical beasts were breaking in even as they were speaking. She might be able to survive the attack, but her beautiful mother, Qiuling, Granny Zhao, Uncle Qiu, and everyone else in Wanping Town would probably be killed by the magical beasts. Without uttering another word, Feng Wu dashed toward the Essence Gathering Tower. Yin Yin reacted first and yelled at Feng Wu as the latter ran off. What do you know about formation? Why are you running so fast? Do you want to be the first to die, or what? That being said, everyone still ran toward the gate as they followed Feng Wu. The Essence Gathering Tower was a shiny, eye-catching structure on the city wall. However, the resplendent tower was barely giving off any light at the moment and had been badly damaged. Its existence was the only reason that everyone inside Wanping Town was still alive. If it collapsed, Feng Wu stopped that train of thought. Standing at the foot of the tower, she quickly examined it with her eyes. One look and Feng Wu realized what had gone wrong. Right now, Master Lin was pushing spiritual crystals into the recesses of the Essence Gathering Tower continuously with trembling hands. Overwhelmed by anxiety, sweat covered his forehead. Why isn't it working? Why? Picking up a spiritual crystal, Feng Wu rubbed it against one of the cracks in the tower. Master Lin looked up and saw that a teenage girl was meddling with the Essence Gathering Tower, which immediately drove him mad. He bellowed, "What are you doing? Stop messing around. Get lost." Because the Essence Gathering formation was on the verge of breaking down, Master Lin was overwhelmed by a mix of nervousness, anxiety, guilt, and consternation. He vented all of it on Feng Wu when he noticed her. Just then Yin Yin and the others arrived. Everyone was shocked when they saw what Feng Wu was doing to the Essence Gathering Tower. Furious shouts ensued. "Are you nuts? Stop." Chapter 195. Are you trying to get everyone killed? Chapter 195. Are you trying to get everyone killed? That's the Essence Gathering Tower you're messing with. What do you know about it? Stop right now. Are you trying to get everyone killed? Everyone was bellowing at the same time, drowning each other out. However, Feng Wu wouldn't have given a damn even if she could make out what they were saying. The only thing she cared about was her family's safety. Just as Master Lin went berserk and jumped at Feng Wu cast him a stern look. The Essence Gathering Tower's main line is blocked. 3 of the auxiliary lines are broken and 5 of the nodes are jammed. What good will it do to keep stuffing in more spiritual crystals? Do you know anything about repairing the tower at all? That successfully baffled Master Lin. He was going to say that it wasn't his fault. As a level 2 formation master, he was already stretching himself thin by maintaining the tower's operation daily. How was he supposed to know how to repair it? That would require a level 3 formation master at least. As the saying went, the insider knew the ropes, while the outsider was just along for the ride. Master Lin was immediately convinced by Feng Wu's words. Feng Wu said grumpily, "Pass me the rotary file." As the town's formation master, Master Lin held a prominent position in Wanping town, second only to General Wu. He almost lost his temper at Feng Wu's direct reproach. However, before he realized it, he had handed Feng Wu the rotary file as told. General Wu couldn't believe his eyes. Master Lin was notorious for his bad temper. He was self-assured, lofty, and hopelessly unapproachable. The townsfolk would have beaten him up a long time ago if it wasn't for his status as the formation master. But now he was taking orders from a teenage girl. With the rotary file in one hand, Feng Wu proceeded to repair the main line right away. Fixing her attention on the main line, she dredged it with the rotary file in one hand and reached out to Master Lin with the other. Spiritual crystal, a large one. Spiritual crystal, a medium one. Spiritual crystal, a small one. King Beast Bone, long. King Beast Bone, short. Oh. As Feng Wu hammered at the Essence Gathering Tower here and there, she asked Master Lin to pass her the various parts she needed. She had to repair the physical structure of the tower, as well as sort out the complicated circuits inside according to the rules of spiritual formation. She was completely absorbed in her work, and the look on her face was serious and calm. Time passed quickly. 10, 9, 8, 7. Those around the tower were so nervous that they thought their hearts were going to jump out of their mouths. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yin Yan's mind went blank as the countdown finished. Something seemed to explode in her chest. Oh God, the Essence Gathering formation was going to fall apart now and they were all going to die. Eyes closed as she waited for death to arrive, Yin Yan, however, was surprised to realize something. Why didn't she hear anything? Opening her eyes, she saw that everyone around her was staring at the girl up on the wall in astonishment. Feng Wu was a great beauty to begin with. When she was completely focused on her work, she looked like she was glowing. She looked breathtakingly beautiful. Feeling her head with her hands, Yin Yan cried out in disbelief. The Essence Gathering Tower is still intact. The formation is still working. The magical beasts haven't broken in. General Wu was as shocked as everyone else was. Didn't Master Lin say that? Could Master Lin have made a mistake? Right now, Master Lin was staring at Feng Wu unblinkingly, his gaze intense and fervent. Because after she put a spiritual crystal into the tower, the dim Essence Gathering formation had brightened up a little. And what did that mean? It meant that the formation had been fixed. At the very least, the main line was working now. Chapter 196. I don't want to die. Chapter 196. I don't want to die. Ha 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 ha. The main line is working. It's working. It's no longer jammed. You're an awesome formation master. Master Lin stared at Feng Wu, eyes shining. What level are you? You can't be a level 3 formation master, can you? Yin Yan and the others all turned to Feng Wu in astonishment. What? This stunning young woman was really a formation master. And a very advanced one for that matter. How was that possible? Feng Wu gave Master Lin a sidelong glance. A level 3 formation master. She smiled and repeated in a non-committal tone. Level 3, you said? Master Lin couldn't tell what level Feng Wu was at, but that was hardly the most important thing at the moment. He asked expectantly. So, can you fix the tower? Feng Wu said no. Master Lin was baffled. But you look so experienced and skillful back there. Why? Feng Wu threw a dirty look at Master Lin. Instead of answering him, she changed the subject. What's the consumption of spiritual crystals like for an intact essence-gathering formation? This is a level 2 essence-gathering tower, which consumes 1 spiritual crystal per minute when under attack. Feng Wu asked quietly, but now, this formation has been partially damaged and the consumption rate is… Wait, it's using half a crystal per minute. I see. Master Lin looked at Feng Wu with sparkling eyes. So we don't need to fix it, because we'll use less spiritual crystals this way. Feng Wu then slowly injected her spiritual essence into the tower. Seal characters emerged from her palms, then floated out and disappeared into the tower. The damaged surface of the tower was gradually repaired. So how long do we have? General Wu found himself standing behind Feng Wu as he watched her with mixed feelings. Who on earth was this young woman? She was able to resuscitate Mrs. Ning, whom young Master Ba had declared dead, and repair the essence-gathering formation, which Master Lin had said was broken. 15 minutes. Feng Wu was grim-faced and serious when she turned to General Wu. That's all the time I can buy you. 15 minutes. The ecstatic look on General Wu's face turned into a bitter smile as he despaired. Reinforcements won't get here in 15 minutes. It seems we're going to die today defending Wanping Town after all. General Wu's gaze shifted to Feng Wu as he spoke, and he felt so sorry for the girl. With her excellent medical skills, her great talent in formation, and her incredible beauty, was she going to die here in Wanping Town today? Could it be that even God was jealous of her? 15 minutes? What's that gonna do for us? Staring at Feng Wu, Yin Yan said anxiously, I don't want to die. I don't care what you do, but you must keep the tower working. You have to. Feng Wu didn't even look at Yin Yan. She went on repairing the essence-gathering formation. Master Lin wouldn't have it. He turned to Yin Yan with a scowl. Do you think anyone here wants to die? Can you do anything other than shout empty threats? We owe you nothing. Who are you to talk like a superior here? Master Lin had always been a proud, lofty figure, for he had never met a person that he truly admired. What Feng Wu did just then stunned him right away. He instinctively idolized capable formation masters, and naturally he stood up for Feng Wu. Yin Yan almost choked on her own breath. Chapter 197 How Can It Be His Royal Highness? Chapter 197 How Can It Be His Royal Highness? She was going to talk back when Mrs. Yen cast her a stern look, which felt sharper than a blade. Yin Yan fell silent right away. Mrs. Yen looked at Feng Wu with an emotion she couldn't describe herself. Back in Sumeru Temple, she had only found the girl arrogant, boorish, and violent. However, the magical beasts and earthquake that followed gradually changed Mrs. Yan's opinion of Feng Wu. She could feel an occasional throbbing pain in her head behind her eyes. Could it be that the girl was right? Was she terminally ill and going to die soon? At that thought, Mrs. Yan's heart raced and a chill ran down her spine. Involuntarily, she pressed a hand to her chest. However, now wasn't the right time to worry about that. The top priority at the moment was to get through this alive. Mother, Yin Yan tried to tell on Feng Wu to Mrs. Yan. To Yin Yan's disbelief, her mother, who had always taken her side, warned her in an exceptionally harsh tone. If you still cherish your life, keep your mouth shut. Aggrieved, Yin Yan burst into tears and ran away. Mrs. Yan didn't have time for Yin Yan's tantrum. The look she gave Feng Wu was expectant, admiring, and a little nervous. Time seemed to stretch infinitely in a life-and-death situation. Each second felt as long as a century. However, the clock still ticked away. Up on the wall, everyone craned their necks to look in the direction of Wanping City, hoping that somehow, reinforcements would show up on the horizon to save them. Where are the reinforcements? Why aren't they coming? Why? How long do we have? It's been 14 minutes. We only have 1 minute left. One last minute again. Looking at the thick horde of magical beasts at the foot of the wall, General Wu was overwhelmed by despair. Having been stationed in Wanping Town all these years, General Wu had fought magical beasts on many occasions, but never had he experienced such a great disparity in strength between humans and magical beasts. 59, 58, 57, 56. Everyone felt their hearts thump in their chests as time ran out. They looked at the horizon, the magical beasts, and the essence-gathering tower in turn. The last spiritual crystal had been put in. As time passed, the resplendent essence-gathering tower began to dim as they watched. "We're doomed." Everyone heard that despairing voice in their heads. Even Feng realized with a chill that they had lost all hope. She had run out of tricks. All she could do now was try her best to keep those around her safe. But, with her current capability, there was very little she could do. Just when everything turned into a jumble in Feng Wu's head. "Look! Someone is coming this way on horseback from the northeast. He's headed for us," someone cried out. Immediately, everyone turned to look in that direction. "But he's just one person. What good can he do?" Linyuan whined. If it were His Royal Highness, he might be able to turn things around even in the most impossible situations. But, how can it be His Royal Highness? Wait, that figure. Why does he look like? Am I having a hallucination because I'm going to die? Chapter 198 The Invisible June Linyuan. Chapter 198 The Invisible June Linyuan. Yin thought that she was hallucinating, which was why she was seeing June Linyuan on that horse. However, around her on the wall, everyone was crying out in surprise. "The Crown Prince! It's the Crown Prince! Oh God! His Royal Highness is charging at the magical beasts all by himself. Is he here to save us? Are we going to survive this?" Yin rubbed her ears. Was she hearing things in addition to seeing hallucinations? Rubbing her eyes, she looked beyond the wall and saw that figure hurtle into the magical beasts on horseback. He was so fast that he looked like a blood-red meteorite flitting across the sky. The teenager leapt into the air. Sky Destroyer swung out in a splendid arc. The shock wave came down in a half-circle and struck the magical beasts below. Crumble! It swept across the field. Everyone on the wall covered their mouths in astonishment. As they watched the shock wave hit the magical beasts, numerous beasts fell with blood pouring from the gashes they sustained. Some wobbled around and fell. Some stumbled back before collapsing. Some tried to flee, but fell to the ground halfway. It felt like that one strike would slash the sky open, and one could smell the killing intent in the air. With one single strike, June Linyuan had cleared out quite a large space. By the looks of it, at least half of the magical beasts had been killed. It was indeed as they said. June Linyuan's wrath could set the sky on fire. Towering over the beasts in midair, June Linyuan stared at them coldly, as if he was looking at a field of dead bodies. Pointing his sword toward the sky, he looked as invincible as the most superior ruler. Oh God! His Royal Highness is awesome. With just one strike he killed more than half of the beasts. Is he even human? He's like a god. These magical beasts drove us into impossible situations more than once, but facing the Crown Prince, they're like ants waiting to be trampled. How can there be such a huge disparity between different individuals? He's got the power, the talent, and the promising future. I wonder what woman would be good enough for him? General Wu said in amazement. The look in June Linyuan's black eyes was sharper and more dangerous than a blade. It was as if his gaze alone was enough to turn one into a dead body. Yin-Yan's eyes sparkled and even her ears turned pink as she looked up at the formidable teenager in midair. She repeated his name under her breath. June Linyuan, June Linyuan, June Linyuan. Feng Wu frowned as she followed June Linyuan with her eyes. June Linyuan was indeed very impressive. His level should be. If her true phoenix blood hadn't been destroyed back then, would she reach June Linyuan's level at his age? At that thought, Feng Wu made a fist. Her cultivation progress was still too slow. Roar! The savage magical beasts that had been threatening to tear down the city walls shivered in fright at June Linyuan's presence. They howled, then scattered in all directions. He had only struck once. With one strike, June Linyuan had killed half of the magical beasts and scared off the rest. Watching the magical beasts run away, the look on June Linyuan's face turned grim. Once they scattered, the magical beasts would cause major damage if they ran into civilian homes. Just then, you're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.